it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The soothing and pleasant sensation that many people experience when listening to the sound of the beach can be attributed to a combination of psychological, physiological, and evolutionary factors. There are many reasons why people tend to enjoy the sound of the beach. Of course, there's the feeling of relaxation and stress reduction. For others, it works as a white noise effect. Perhaps my favorite reason is the notion of biophilia. Now, biophilia is a concept that suggests that humans have an innate connection to nature and natural environments. The sound of the beach, with its gentle waves, reminds us of the natural world and can evoke positive emotions and a sense of being close to nature. So, my dear friends, join me this evening for 3 hours of stories told by the beach. Dead Skin Masks by Corpse Child. So, really don't know what to say here other than I'm pretty sure I'm surrounded by dead people. No, I don't mean that I'm seeing ghosts or zombies or anything like that. I mean that I see them, their faces of people I know for a fact were dead, not walking around, perfectly well and alive. Am I the only one that's noticed it? Well, probably, considering I'm not seeing or hearing more people talking about this. Either that or I'm even deeper into some real shit than I realized. If that's the case, then I'll have to keep this relatively brief. And as soon as I finish writing this, I'll have to get gone quickly. If I had to guess, this might have started with that commercial. It was for this new beauty care product called New Face, claiming to be able to instantly transform you into a whole new you. You know, standard fare. We can do what doctors and dermatologists can't pitch. Well, here's an excerpt from one of their earliest commercials. New face. By putting on a whole new skin. In only seconds, that's right, seconds, you can accomplish what would take plastic surgery hours, even days to accomplish, at less than a fraction of the cost and less than half the pain. You can call and book an appointment with your cosmetologist today to get your brand new face. But hurry, supplies won't last long. Now, the commercial itself, at least back then, was nothing special. It's just some hyperactive yahoo spouting the product's praises, while a basic diagram of a person's face was on the screen, changing from before and after use. I personally thought nothing of it. I had no use for it, and I honestly didn't figure many others would either. I figured most would have looked at this and said, interesting, next. Obviously, though, since I'm here talking about this, that's not what happened. It was a slow rise, sure, but it made it, and eventually I was seeing a bunch of social media threads with this stuff. I remember not being able to open Facebook for a week and a half without seeing at least 3 or 4 of my friends posting about, I got my new face today, hashtag New Year, New Me, along with 20-something odd other random people's posts on it. Again, this was just back when it had come out, about 9 or 10 months ago now. I should also mention that it only seemed to be available in my city, Pine Brook, North Carolina. I tried at one point, out of sheer curiosity, to look to see just how widespread it was. Nowhere else seemed to offer the product, though. I'm not sure how much longer that's going to stay the case, which, if what I've seen is true, could be a real nightmare for us all. So yeah, it was quite a fact. The way they did it was remarkable. I will say, before I found out how they were pulling it off, I remember seeing a lot of speculation on Facebook and such, either asking if anyone knew what the secret was, or just straight up coming up with blown-out-of-the-ass theories, spouting a bunch of scientific jargon nobody, including themselves more than likely, understood. Any way you sliced it, the results were there. People posting before and after pics were showing how, when they went in for the treatment or operation, they looked vastly different. Some were gaunt and had wrinkles, liver spots, and just generally looked exhausted or sickly. After they got it, though, they come out looking unrecognizable. They'd look younger and healthier, as opposed to the aforementioned elderly, homeless, or drug addict type of look that I described before. Soon, of course, I began seeing some of these people out and about on the streets. Some of them were people I kind of knew, people I used to remember seeing frequently out and about, either out shopping, grabbing chips and smokes from the 7-Eleven, or lounging around the bus stop just up the street from the Publix. All of them now had a new face. And they looked completely different, like they weren't even the same people anymore. A few of the ones I'd occasionally talked to. I'm not a very outgoing person, by the way. Well, I had to ask who the hell they were. One time I asked a lady if she'd just blown into town here in the sticks from New York or something, being that hers made her look like a magazine model. Well, she laughed and said, "No, you goof, it's me, Christina, from the bar." I looked confused at her. "You know, the one you keep getting your Jaeger bombs from every Friday night, which you still have quite the tab racked up for, by the way." Sure enough, she was telling the truth. It was her voice, which I recognized from her sort of country girl accent, but it wasn't her face. Her face used to be kind of rounded, with a dimple showing every time she'd smile. Now her face was a bit more pointed at the chin, longer too. The skin around her face was a bit darker now as well, where it was a very light white colour before. Well, it was different, all of it. Not necessarily bad, but definitely different. It was off. Sorry, I said, chuckling nervously. Well, I did have a bit of a thing for her, hence the Friday night bar trips. "I didn't recognize you. You look different." She chuckled again and told me she'd gotten a new face procedure done. Well, it was painless and didn't need to use no funny gas or nothing. It was over before I knew it, and the best part, I only had to pay $150 for it. She winked and said, "So, what do you think?" "Well, it looks..." I stumbled. I wasn't really sure what to say. Sure, she looked hot with the new look, though again, I thought she looked cute enough the way she was before. But something about it, I don't know. I guess just how different, how new, I guess you could say it looked on her, caused me to hesitate, freezing my tongue. Her face began to sink a little, noticing my hesitation. I had to think of something to say quickly to keep from hurting her feelings. Finally, I worked up the gumption to say, "Well, it looks different. It looks new." "Does that mean you like it?" she asked shyly. "Well, yeah, I mean, it's just so weird seeing you look so different. Not even recognizing you, you know." Her face fell again. "Oh," she said, disappointed. "Well, okay, see you Friday?" I chuckled just as awkwardly and answered that I wouldn't make it, having to work late that night. Well, it was an obvious lie, but I guess she picked up on the point. She just said she'd see me around before walking away. This wasn't exactly the only occasion like this, where friends and other people I knew weren't recognizable to me anymore. Well, it was the only time shit got embarrassing like that. Pretty soon it got to the point where I was basically the only one in town who I knew of that didn't get a new face. I couldn't have cared less for it, don't get me wrong, but I can't lie and say it didn't feel weird being the only one that wasn't walking around with a different looking face. By that point, maybe a month later, commercials were more frequent for it. Now some were even featuring celebrity sponsorships, including famous actors. All of them claimed to have undergone the procedure. In other words, it's very much possible that the way you see some of these people look on TV isn't how they actually looked when they were born, if you get what I mean. And the worst part, I don't think they even know what it actually is they're wearing. I don't think any of them know. Only, of course, the people performing the surgery and, well, now, me. I know this is a lot, I know they're after me now because of what I know and what I've seen, but others need to know. Others need to know because, like I said, the popularity of this thing is growing more and more. It scares the hell out of me, what I believe will happen soon if no one shares this. It was last Friday when it started to take a downward dive for me. By then, New Face had been on the scene for almost 7 months, with it seeming to only get more and more popular. I'd gotten used to, well, mostly gotten used to, seeing everyone looking completely different from what they had before. Again, I personally felt fine just the way I was, so why change it? even if it was only $150. But at the same time, who was I to judge? Other people want to dump their money into that shit. More power to them. Others, though, I noticed started looking at me weirdly. Some would ask me if I'd gotten one or when I was going to get one. When I told them my feelings about it, they'd look at me like I was telling them I'd turned down an offer to live in a mansion or something. It didn't bother me too much, but it was annoying. Because of this, I took to going out less and less during the day, besides work, instead deciding I'd just go out at night time. Given how small Pine Brook is, things were usually quiet come nightfall. And add the fact that it got nice and cool when the sun went down, you had a nice place for a nighttime stroll. That is, until that Friday night when, during my weekly little bar hop I mentioned earlier, my buddy Nestor showed me a thing on his newsfeed about areas of local cemeteries being found exhumed, the bodies missing. No names had been listed as to exactly who the missing deceased were, as it was sort of this just in type deal. No time for any real investigation to have been launched yet. Why do they do it, Don? Nestor asked me, knocking back his 5th shot of Jack that night. Oh, hell if I'd know, I replied, chuckling dryly. Where'd that happen anyway? He looked at the article on his phone for a moment. Hey, hold on, man, look here. He held the phone up to me and pointed out a paragraph he'd highlighted. Ain't that just ways up the road, midway out of Pine Brook? I read the passage, and sure enough, he was right. The article read that, at around 9:45 the night before, the groundskeeper from Morning Gate Cemetery, which, like Nestor said, was just outside of town, reported to police that at least 7 plots had been dug up and the bodies were gone. My eyes went wide at this. How the hell? I exclaimed. I know, right? Nestor added. Admittedly, while I was kind of spooked, I was curious more than anything else. Who and just how the hell did somebody dig up and make off with 7 bodies without anyone knowing? Of course, the bigger and more frightening question pushed this one to the back of my mind. Why? What was worse, though, was how this happened not too far from the bar, maybe 10 or 15 minutes walking distance. The thought of some creep out there, so close to home, snatching bodies for God only knew what, sent me into goosebumps. It was enough to make me risk my life that night, having Nestor drive me home despite being pretty buzzed, rather than walk home like he usually did. Well, at least I won't run into some creep, I thought. Once I got home, ironically enough, I'd all but forgotten about the article. Everything was just fine. That was until noon the next day when Nestor sent me another link to a news article. It was a follow-up about another 3 bodies going missing from Morning Gate, including the groundskeeper himself. What the hell? I know, right? That was last night. What, while we were at the bar? Jesus Christ. Yeah, just before we left. You see what happened to the old buzzard running the place, right? Old man Granger? Yeah, says he's missing too. Missing? More like on the run, I'm almost willing to bet. What do you mean? Come on, think about it. You know as well as I do that place gets locked tighter than a damn high school locker come nightfall, right? Yeah. So? So that plus, unless you're freaking Spider-Man, good luck scaling the fence around the place. Means that Granger was the only person who'd have access to the grounds at nighttime. Well, I was stumped there. He had a point. The old man was the only one that could have accessed the grounds and the bodies. No one else, or at least it was highly unlikely at the time, could have gotten in. Okay, but why? Like you said, hell if I'd know. Well, it's not like old Granger was entirely your average Joe, you know. Once again, he had a point. I'd only interacted with the guy a handful of times before. While he wasn't mean or unfriendly, he was a little odd. Of course, he was pushing 68, even if he only looked like he was about 45 or 50. And he spends every night in a freaking graveyard watching over dead people. So I can really be surprised there. Well, that being said, I didn't figure him for the type to actually want to dig them up and steal them. But then, who else? Well, if it was him, though, why'd he report it the other night to the authorities? You mean besides the fact he was cracking? Probably for the attention. Either that or to try and shift the blame, like he is now with his disappearance. Anyhow, it's karaoke night at the bar tonight. You in? He didn't reply. I was barely comfortable leaving my house during daylight, and now this. No, needless to say, that was it for my late-night excursions for a while. Especially if Nestor's theory about the old man was true, and again I couldn't exactly prove him wrong. And he really was out there, hiding somewhere. Then it was a good bet that that somewhere wasn't far from the cemetery. Well, that above everything else kept me tossing and turning that night, and the night after. I stayed holed up in my house both days straight, only opening the door for the pizza guy. I'd have stayed in Tuesday too. Hell, I'd have likely never come out from my house again if I could. But unfortunately, body-snatching maniac on the loose wasn't quite a good enough excuse for me to miss shifts at work. Well, yes, in that vein, I luckily only worked the morning shifts, meaning I'd be off by no later than 4. Despite this, I was still skittish, constantly darting my eyes around everywhere, thinking I'd find him staring back at me. Well, this turned out to be a real pain, as it meant that I couldn't really focus. There were multiple instances where I'd fuck up and forget to give a customer the correct change. Finally, my lunch break rolled around, and I was able to at least get away from the register for a while. Once I'd punched the clock for lunch, I decided to grab a bag of Cheetos, a frosted honey bun, and a Dr. Pepper to munch on. Nothing like a little junk food to calm your nerves when you look out for a maniac, right? That was when I looked up and saw him. Right there, right in front of my freaking face on the other side of the shelf, where the chips were, was old man Granger himself. My eyes went wide, color draining from my face. Oh God, he's here. He's right here. What do I do? Every instinct told me to bolt for the phone and dial the police. But I just stood there, frozen. Hey there, Donnie, he exclaimed excitedly in a voice that I was pretty sure wasn't Granger's. We missed you last night at the bar. Yeah, you should have seen me up on the stage singing Sweet Child of Mine. He chuckled before asking how I'd been. I still stood frozen. Now I was more confused than frightened. Keith? Is that you? He just barked an obnoxious laugh. Hell, yeah, last I checked. At least I hope I didn't drink so much that I forgot who the hell I was. I continued staring stupidly at him. Man, that's Keith, all right. Why does he look like old man Granger? How? What's wrong? See a ghost or something? He asked. Oh, no, I just, didn't know what I was supposed to say. I didn't know it was you there. I thought it was, well, someone else. He cocked his eyebrow at me. Well, I don't know how. Last I checked, there's only one me. Yeah, but you look different. I didn't recognize you. You get a new face? He barked out another laugh and said, Oh, yeah, that. Yeah, I got this done last Wednesday. Connie was getting one, which, by the way, made her look better than she did back when she was 18. She told me I should get one, too. Shit, couldn't beat the results or the price, even with a lifetime supply of Botox. I see, I replied, anxiety flooding through my body. He told me that the one he got was a fresh sample. For some reason, this alarmed me. What? What does that mean? Well, from what the docs say, it's a fresh new one they sent in just the night before. God, my legs started shaking. Brand new. Just sent in, but then... Oh, and, exactly when did you say you got this done? I asked. A horrifying feeling was quickly worming its way up from my stomach, causing me to feel nauseous. A couple of days ago, Saturday, I believe. He stroked his chin, the chin of old man Granger, and added, I remember because I was excited to show up sporting the new look to the mic that night. Well, that did it. I quickly booked it to the bathroom where I promptly emptied my stomach. By the time I was done, I was left feeling dizzy. Not only that, but now I was more scared than ever. Now I knew it wasn't Granger who was snatching the bodies from the cemetery. And that instilled an all-new fear into me. Now I didn't know who or what to expect. Then another thought occurred to me. Keith didn't even know that was old man Granger's face he was now wearing. That got me thinking about everyone else in town I saw, walking around with a new face. Was it the same for them? After just barely managing to finish my shift that day, I bolted home quicker than I ever had before, looking over my shoulder the entire time, and locked myself in the house. Once I was at least relatively certain no one was following me or able to break in if they were, I started looking again at the news link Nestor had sent me. As far as the case of the missing bodies from Morninggate Cemetery went, the police were still investigating, and still at a loss. I then decided, against all better judgment, to look into my haunting little hunch a little further. I started looking to see if any of the cemeteries close by had any sort of incidents. After about 5 minutes of searching, I found nothing for any graveyards closer to town than Morninggate. I should have stopped there, I know, and God knows I wish I had. Hell, I'd have been perfectly frickin' fine never being the wiser about any of this. But as it happened, I did dig further. I started looking for incidents in cemeteries farther than Morninggate. It took a bit of time, but I eventually found it. It's a small string of headlines from another town's news site that was listed as a series of posts on a tabloid website. It was titled, "Terror of the Dallas NC Body Snatchers," and it detailed a string of incidents where bodies in the cemeteries were found missing. Photos were posted of graves either left uncovered or sloppily recovered. The post stated that police investigated the cases for almost a year, even apprehending a few suspects. But each of them had airtight alibis that cleared them, with no other leads, as well as little to basically no kind of concrete evidence to anyone else. They eventually had to pack it up and declare the cases cold. And, as you can imagine, no trace or leads were ever seen or heard about the missing bodies since. I felt sick to my stomach. Looking at the date of the last article, I realized that it was only about a year and a half before the ads for New Face started cropping up here in town. I couldn't believe it. But there it was, clear as goddamn crystal. This product is made out of dead bodies. That was when an all-new wave of terror shook through me. Thinking again of what Keith said in the convenience store, I realized that whoever these sick, twisted fuckheads were, they weren't picky about how long the specimen had actually been dead before using it. Granger wasn't dead until they got to him. In other words, these people weren't limited to grave robbing for this. They were apparently killers as well. And that's why I have to leave. I spent the past few nights packing what I can and finding somewhere I can stay in the next town over. I put in my 2 weeks' notice at the convenience store as well, even though, once I'm done with this, I'm going to be well on my way out of Pinebrook and not looking back. I'll just leave you with this. I don't know how much longer it'll be before New Face, or possibly some other fucked up byproduct made by whoever these psychos are, ends up expanding their market outside of Pinebrook. But it will. I just hope that when it does, I'll be far away and people will know. Also, I hope that no one sees my face again. I'm afraid there'd be a chance that when they find me, it might not actually be me wearing it. Stationed in a Fire Tower by Michael Kelso. When I first got the job, I couldn't believe my luck. I was a very solitary person. I loved to read and be alone. When I saw an ad for a park ranger manning a fire tower, I just about jumped out of my skin. Working overnight at a Walmart wasn't exactly the best job in the world. There are some stories I could tell about that as well. But I applied for the job and was ecstatic that I got it. They made me do a week of training before my first shift. Most of it was dry reading and making sure I was qualified in CPR. They showed me the job's in and outs, and then I followed in my car as we drove to the town. In the middle of the day, it was awe-inspiring to stare up at the underside of the tower looming above me, suspended high in the air by the metal pylons. Once I started climbing the narrow metal stairs with hints of rust at the edges, I was somewhat less than excited. In fact, I was terrified. I don't like heights very much. It's not like I go all vertigo or anything. It's just I prefer to stay on the ground. Once we'd reached the top and pushed open the trapdoor to get onto the deck that surrounded the tower, I was doing a little better. I opened the door that led into the tower's interior. Looking around the room made me forget all about that terrible climb. It was like a small apartment. There was a small refrigerator, sink, counter, cupboards, and a small table. In the center of the room was a table with a map permanently attached to it. Of course, there were windows all around. There was a 360-degree view, as you'd expect for a fire tower in the middle of a state park. And the view was absolutely amazing. I could see peaks and valleys for miles in every direction. It was a photographer's dream. The other ranger explained what was expected of me. We worked 24-hour shifts, so there would be times I'd have to sleep, but I had to set an alarm and get up to scan for problems at least once per hour during the night. During daytime hours, I had to scan every 30 minutes. There was a radio to report any trouble and a phone in case I needed to call the fire department. In my mind, I was already drooling at the thought of getting paid to take amazing pictures and sit around reading books. Well, the ranger told me it was extremely important that I read the rule book first thing. He asked if I had any questions. I said no. He reinforced that I could not leave the tower no matter what until I was relieved. I followed him down the narrow staircase to get my supplies from my car then. He got in his truck and hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But then he shut the door, wished me well, and drove away. It took me 3 trips to get all my stuff up to the top. At home it's nothing to bring a few boxes of groceries into the house, but here it became life and death. I was near the top with the box in front of me when I stumbled on one of the narrow steps and nearly fell over the side. I paused for a long moment to regain my balance before continuing to the top. And it suddenly struck me that this job might not be the cakewalk I thought it was. I pushed that thought to the back of my mind, went for my next 2 loads. Basic supplies, books, phone chargers, and camera occupied the second and last trips. Once I was up for good, I collapsed into the chair. I was on my way to Napland when I heard static on the radio. I jumped up and grabbed it. "Hello?" I said, but no one answered. I figured this was the ranger's subtle way of reminding me it was time to do a check. But lugging 3 loads up the tiny stairs of death had put a serious crimp in my fire watch time. In fact, it had been nearly an hour since the other ranger had left. I did my slow pan around the room, checking each part of the forest for smoke, and seeing none. Having successfully completed my first go-around, I celebrated with a bottle of water while I put the groceries away. Well, the cupboards weren't empty, but they weren't a gourmet's delight either. Nearly a full shelf of baked beans didn't exactly thrill me, but I had the supplies that should do me for a few shifts. I sat the bread down on the counter and loaded the cold cuts into the fridge. I'd get some more options the next time I went shopping. By the time I'd finished putting things away, it was time for another check. The sun was starting to set, so I grabbed my camera and took some amazing pictures. I couldn't wait to upload them to my computer at home. As I looked around the room, my eyes landed on the manual. I realized I hadn't read it yet. I sighed and took it over to the chair. I was sure it would have me out cold in no time. As I opened the book, a piece of notebook paper fell out. I picked it up and read. "Read the rules. Never under any circumstances leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. If you receive a radio transmission or phone call between those hours, do not answer. If anyone knocks on the trapdoor during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice, 1 minute apart, and lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best." I sat the note down and stared at it. Was this a joke? Were they having some fun with the new guy? Well, I wasn't looking forward to getting hazed at 2 o'clock in the morning. I put the note back in the book and skimmed through the manual. It was a real snooze fest of standard rules and nonsense. For the next check, I decided to use binoculars. I was rewarded by seeing a bear in 3D. I pulled out my camera and took some pics, but the zoom wasn't quite as much as I needed to get some really good shots. You could still tell it was a bear, but it was a little blurry. I decided to go camera shopping with my first paycheck. What's the use of having this spectacular view if you can't take good pictures of it? Soon after sunset came the twilight. The sky lit up a brilliant orange. I took some more pictures and did my scan. I was just about to go back inside when I noticed a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better view, but there were too many trees in the way. I pulled out my compass and got a general direction, then grabbed the radio and called the ranger on duty. I told him I had a fire and gave him the general direction and distance. He acknowledged it and said he'd check it out. I stayed glued to my binoculars, waiting to see the smoke lessen. The minutes each seemed to take an eternity as the smoke continued to rise. Nearly half an hour later, the radio came to life. "Hey, rookie," the ranger said. "Did you find it? Did you put it out? I still see smoke. Did I tell you the wrong place?" I said into the radio, all in one breath. "Whoa there," he said. "Everything's fine. It's just a campfire." "What?" "Campfire," he said. "Nothing to worry about." "A campfire?" I repeated in a daze. "Yeah, you'll want to see more smoke, and it should be a lot thicker and darker before you call it in." I stood in silence, my face beet red with embarrassment. Cheer up," the ranger said into the silence. "At least you didn't call the fire department." I looked over at the phone, knowing I was mere minutes from doing that very thing. "Yeah, thanks," I said. "Sorry about that." Don't worry, kid," he said. "At least you erred on the side of caution instead of letting the forest burn down." I put my face in my palm and shook my head. Well, so much for a good first impression. Twilight had faded, leaving a few last vestiges of light as the clouds transformed from dirty grey to black. I began to realize just how alone I was out here when the canopy of the night fully fell. Doing my checks from inside was nearly impossible. I had lights on, and every window I looked out became a mirror of me looking back in at myself. Alone in a wooden box suspended 100 feet above the ground made it that much creepier. I stepped out onto the deck in the cool evening air. The total darkness was oppressive. I couldn't see anything. How was I supposed to see smoke? I did a slow walk around the deck, looking out blindly at the trees. As my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out some shapes of the mountains and even the soft glow in the distance of the nearest town. That was small comfort to know that things still existed out in the world, and I hadn't been plunged into this cover of darkness. I finished my check and stepped back inside. After being out in the darkness, it was way too bright. I turned off the main overhead light and the light over the entrance. The room settled into a comfortable glow with enough light to see but not to blind. In fact, it was a little too cozy. I felt a nap coming on. I lay down on the surprisingly comfortable cot and closed my eyes. I woke some time later to static sounding on the radio. I reached for the radio to answer it, but something in the back of my mind told me not to. I looked at my watch, and it said 2:12 a.m. I froze. Looking around the lit room, I thought about the strange rules I'd read earlier. I reached up and turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. As my eyes adjusted and I could see a few things, I looked out the window and could swear I saw someone peering in at me. Just then, I heard static on the radio. There was a voice trying to get through, but it seemed too weak. I waited to see if they'd call again. A minute later, static sounded once more, but beneath it I heard the voice. It was a little stronger this time. I could just make it out. "Help me," it said in a feeble yet insistent voice. I reached for the radio, but something made me glance at my watch first. It was 2:23 a.m. I faltered and didn't answer. These are those creepy rules, I thought. What if they're real? I've already broken one by having the lights on. What happens when you break the rules? I sat in silence, wanting to know the answer, but at the same time not wanting to know. The radio call came through much more clearly this time. "Help me. Can anyone hear me? I need help." The voice sounded desperate. Couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It had a strange quality that I couldn't quite place. I fought the urge to answer, not knowing if I'd be fired for dereliction of duty or not. This was what I was out here for. I needed to answer, but my mind just wouldn't let go of those rules. The minutes ticked by like hours, and 3 more times the radio sounded out its plea, each time sounding more desperate. I watched the time, counting the seconds until 3. When the time finally came, I picked up the radio. "Whoever was calling for help, please state your position so I can relay help to you," I said. "Who is this?" came the answer on the radio. "This is a park ranger manning a fire tower." "Well, park ranger, I've been on this channel all night, and yours is the first voice I've heard." "Gee, that's not possible," I thought. "I had several calls for help over the last hour," I said. "You sure?" "Absolutely. I wrote down the time of each call." "Then why didn't you answer them until now?" I paused. What could I say? Because a weird list of rules told me not to. "Ranger?" I had, I said hesitantly, "extenuating circumstances." "Extenuating circumstances?" the voice repeated as though tasting them. What circumstances would those be? Whoever this was, they weren't going to let it go. "I'm not at liberty to say." "You mean like falling asleep and breaking the rules?" the voice said, sounding deeper, raspier, and more menacing. I froze. I hadn't turned the lights on yet, leaving the room in eerie darkness that left me feeling very exposed. I slowly panned around, looking out the windows and remembering the earlier feeling of being watched. "You can look all you want, but you won't see me," the voice said. "It's after 3, I said, hoping the terror I felt wasn't evident in my voice. "You have no power over me." The voice chuckled. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Normally you'd be correct. However, you broke the rules." "What if I didn't know about the rules?" I said, grasping at straws. "Nice try. But you knew you should be safe after 3. Damn it, I thought. I picked up on that. "So, what do you want?" I said, fearing the answer. "We're hungry," the voice said, only now it sounded like many voices speaking at once. "Come down and let us feed." My legs turned to rubber as I stumbled over to the door and stepped out onto the deck. The moon was rising half full, casting light into the darkness. I looked down and saw over a dozen large animals surrounding the tower in a circle, and each one of them was looking up at me. I dove back inside and locked the door. I frantically searched for the flashlight. Once I found it, I picked up the phone to call the ranger station. There was no dial tone. I hung up and tried again, but still nothing. I pulled out my cell phone, but there was no signal. I paused then to clear my head. "Okay," I thought. "You're freaked out right now, but what's actually happened? A weirdo on the radio? Some animals around the tower? This list is making you paranoid." Just then I looked outside, and there was a light off in the distance that looked like an airplane. The problem was that it was heading straight toward me. God, it was mesmerizing. I found myself staring into the rapidly approaching glow until I realized it was going to ram into the tower. I found the best cover I could on the opposite side of the room and surrounded myself with as much furniture as possible. Being that the furnishings were sparse, that meant I dragged the chair over in front of me. I covered my eyes and hoped for the best, and I may or may not have mumbled one of those "I'll promise I'll be good if you get me out of this" prayers. The seconds tumbled into minutes. Nothing happened. I peeked over the edge of the counter, and the light was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and wondered why I hadn't heard any engine sound. I decided it was because I was too busy ducking for cover. And then it hit me. I grabbed the manual and pulled out the list of rules. There it was, rule number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. I read over the rules again and realized how many had come to pass. For a long moment, I thought that it maybe was an elaborate joke. Some of the rangers yanking the rookie's chain. But there was too much I couldn't explain. The radio transmissions, the glowing light, the animals surrounding the tower. Then I realized I'd broken that rule too. I hadn't fired the flare gun as instructed. I dug through the cupboard where the emergency supplies were kept and found the gun. I grabbed 2 flares and stepped out onto the deck. As I questioned the intelligence of firing flares that could end up causing a forest fire when I was supposed to be trying to prevent them, I heard a strange sound. I held my breath and cocked my ear for a better listen. It wasn't just one sound, it was many. I glanced over the side of the rail toward the ground and saw the animals all growling and pawing at the ground, working themselves into a frenzy. I backed away and loaded the first flare, then pointed up and fired. It rose majestically, glowing blood red until gravity slowed its ascent and pulled it back to Earth. I watched closely to make sure not only that it went out, but where it landed, just in case. I waited a minute and fired the second flare, watching where it landed as well. I then stepped back inside and hid in the bathroom as instructed. I knew in my heart that I was safe from the animals as long as I didn't go down the steps. The radio sounded off, scaring me nearly half to death. "Fire, tower number 5. The voice said. "I've seen your flares. I'm on my way. Are you physically injured?" "No, not at the moment," I said. "I'll explain when you get here." "Roger that. En route." I tried to calm my nerves by thinking about what job I would apply for next, and how unfortunate it was that this one hadn't worked out. I thought about what I was going to tell the ranger when he got here. I couldn't tell him the truth, but what else could I say? Yeah, there were some animals at the bottom of the tower that scared me. I honestly considered calling him back and telling him not to come, when I felt heavy footsteps on the bottom stairs of the fire tower. I must have been daydreaming and let time slip by. I stepped out of the bathroom and went to the trap door. "Yeah, you here already?" I said into the radio as I reached down to unlatch the trap door. "Gee, that was fast." "What are you talking about?" came the clear answer over the radio. "I'm not there yet." I paused as I felt the footsteps come closer to the top. "Where are you?" I said quietly. "I can barely see the tower. Probably a mile away." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked down at the bolt I was about to unlatch and pulled my hand back very slowly. "Which direction are you coming from?" I said. "Southeast." I looked in that direction, and sure enough, I could see headlights approaching. The radio sounded again, but with a slightly different voice. "Tower, ignore that last transmission," it said. "I'm already here. Let me in, please." I stared down at the trapdoor as though it wanted to bite me. "Tower, let me in," it said more insistently. I backed away as something began beating on the trapdoor with tremendous force. The board shook with every impact. I stepped inside and locked the door, then barricaded it with my only loose piece of furniture, the chair. Tower 5, I don't know who that is talking to you, but it isn't me. Do not open that door. Repeat, do not open that door." I backed into the bathroom with the flare gun in hand and locked the door. The pounding on the trap door became louder. I knew it wouldn't take much more of a beating, and the whole room shook with every impact. I closed my eyes and prayed in earnest this time. And then my salvation came in the form of the engine sound of a pickup truck. I knew the real ranger was here. I listened as it came closer, and then stopped. There was an awful silence for a moment, and then gunfire. Over and over, multiple shots in rapid succession. Then there was a lull, followed by more shots. The pounding on the trapdoor had stopped as soon as the truck pulled up. "The coast is clear, Ranger. You can open the door now," came a voice over the radio. I put my hand on the knob, smiling to go out and greet my savior, when I heard a weak transmission. "Don't. Not me," it rasped. A heartbeat later, the screaming began. It was a gut-wrenching scream of terrible suffering. I could hear it beneath me. All I could do was drop to the floor and curl up in a ball as the screaming went on and on. I closed my eyes and tried not to imagine that poor ranger being ripped to shreds by God knows what. Soon the screams lessened in volume and intensity, as though they were moving away. I rocked back and forth, hugging my knees until unconsciousness mercifully took me. I woke to strange voices calling my name. I opened my eyes and I was surrounded by people in blue uniforms. I panicked and backed away from them as fast as I could until my back hit a wall. "Calm down," one of them said. "It's all right." I looked around the room like an animal that had been backed into a corner. I was ready to fight my way out. "Are you injured?" he asked. My mind raced to remember where I was. I looked out the window and it was morning. The sun was shining and I could see blue clouds. Everything from last night came back to me in a rush. I looked around the room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh, I'm not injured," I said to the EMT. "Can you tell us what happened here?" a ranger said from behind me. I looked over at the manual that contained the list of rules and, for a heartbeat, considered telling him to read them. "No," was all I said instead. "Can I go home now?" The ranger glared at me. Wanting answers and not getting them is frustrating, I know. "Is he all right to drive?" the ranger asked the EMT. They gave me the once-over, BP, lungs, heart rate, and didn't find anything to be concerned about. "Well, I'd say physically he's fine," the EMT said. The ranger sighed. "Go ahead," he said, "but I'll want to talk to you tomorrow." I nodded and stood, gathered my things, and started toward the door. When I got to the open trapdoor, I hesitated, seeing it had been hacked open with an axe. I took a tentative first step, then another. Surviving a night as I had, only to fall down several flights of stairs, would be quite ironic. As I made my way down, white-knuckling the railing the whole way, I saw people busy at the bottom. They were picking up shell casings with gloves and putting them into plastic bags. I could see spots of blood here and there, but no bodies, either human or animal. I saw the trail of blood as it disappeared into the woods. I stood on the bottom step for a long time, wondering if I was allowed to step onto the ground. I took the step and bolted from my car. I started up and drove out of there as fast as I could. Just as I turned onto the gravel road, a deer walked out in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and slid to a stop mere inches from hitting it. It didn't move. It just stood there staring at me. As I looked more closely, I could see blood on its nose and mouth. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a shred of a ranger's patch impaled on one of his antlers. Its eyes bored into mine as I slammed into reverse, and then drove, swerved around the deer, and broke every speed limit getting home. I called my boss and quit as soon as I got there. Then I packed and started looking for a job in the city. Maybe I can find a nice quiet warehouse to guard. But if it has a strange set of rules, I'm walking out. No questions asked. I exorcised a demon and It Followed Me Home by Estelle Pope. The thing I love the most about specializing in exorcism is not so much the excitement or the thrill of the church, but the happy, smiling faces of my clients afterwards, especially children. He was a spitting image of my little nephew, right down to the brown hair as flat as a river through a valley. He was lying as still as a stone, his hands limp by his sides, his face like death itself. For a moment his heart stopped, and mine did too. Each passing second was agony. Then his eyes flew open and his breathing stabilized. The color came slowly back to his cheeks. The boy sat up, coughing out blood. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Then he smiled that rainbow smile that made my heart flutter inside, the smile that always makes this job so worthwhile. "Thank you, Father Peter." The mother started to sob, her emotions gushing out of her like water from a dam. I squeezed her hand tight and whispered that everything was going to be all right. With a final smile, I grabbed my hat and started out of the door. "Oh, wait!" I turned to see the mother's eyes sparkling. Relief, gratitude. She struggled to get the words out. "Father Peter, thank you so much." I smiled at her and tipped my hat. "There isn't a problem, ma'am." She burst into tears again, and I could still hear her as I made my way down to the bus. I was still laughing, giddy with joy at another successful exorcism. But as the bus pulled away from the station and lumbered down the road, worry started to creep in and my heart sank with dread. For my own little boy was not well. I had big dreams for my nephew. I was there when he was born, and I was there for his christening and baptism. I named him Peter, Peter the 10th, after me and my father and all the men that had come before me. I was hoping that he would follow me into the priesthood. I dreamed of the day I could teach him with my tips and tricks, the day he could successfully exorcise his first demon like a baby taking his first steps, and of the day I could finally tell him, "Oh, I'm so proud of you." But the house was too quiet as I slipped back home and hung up my hat. The sunlight slipped into the late afternoon, illuminating a long white arm that stretched across the hall. My sister, Maria, was frozen on the couch, staring listlessly at the television. The sound had dulled out to a babble that didn't matter anymore. I tiptoed up to my nephew's room, where he lay. Well, he was barely moving, and his face was the color of weak tea. Shadows fluttered beneath closed eyelids. Sweat dribbled down his face and moistened his bedsheets. I lay a hand on his forehead, and it came away hot. "You'll get better, Junior," I whispered, her lips trembling. "I swear he'll do everything he can to help you." Well, the empty promise hung in the air as I closed the door and went downstairs to sit with my sister. He would never get better. That was the fact I had to deal with, the fact my sister had to deal with, and the reality that hit us day after day as Junior got worse and worse. Money was running out. Time was running out. We simply didn't know what to do. My sister gripped my hand, her knuckles white. She leaned against me like a house of cards, and she closed her eyes and went to sleep. Poor Maria. Tomorrow she'd wake up to another nightmare. I drifted off myself, my dreams plagued with worry. "Good morning, Mother. Good morning, Uncle." Maria screamed. I opened my eyes to a miracle. Junior was standing in front of us. He was wearing a freshly starched button-up shirt, black pants and a tie. He was standing straight like a soldier to attention, and he was smiling. It had been a long time since I'd seen him smile. "How are you feeling, Junior?" I gasped. "Oh, perfectly fine. Thank you so much for asking, Uncle." I clasped my nephew's hands into my own. Oh, it felt like grasping a cold fish, but his eyes shone like fire. "Oh, thank you, Lord," I whispered, tears in my eyes, "for healing my nephew. I will forever repay you with your kindness." My nephew shivered at my touch and squirmed in my grip. A look of worry crossed his face, but then it relaxed into a smile. "I'm glad I can make you happy, Uncle," he said. He insisted on sitting at the breakfast table with us. Usually he'd be fidgety, restless, before inhaling his food and rushing out the front door. Today he sat up straight at the breakfast table like an iron rod was shoved down his back. Maria set down a plate of sausages in front of him. Junior picked up his cutlery, cut the sausage into pieces, then nibbled into each one daintily with a fork. Well, my jaw dropped. For years we've been struggling to teach him how to eat. He'd improved by leaps and bounds overnight. After breakfast, Junior cleared the table and insisted on helping his mum with the dishes, so I retreated to my study. But when I opened my door, my heart stopped short. My study was a mess. My Bibles were ripped apart, shredded paper falling down to the ground like snow. The shelves had crumbled into wooden planks and were piled up like firewood. But what chilled me to the bone were the pentagrams, thousands of them drawn painstakingly all over my study, crawling up the walls and on the floor, over and over, a pattern almost like wallpaper. Each had a single 5-pointed star in the center. It was the color of blood. As I began to tidy up, I couldn't stop staring at these pentagrams. The 5-pointed crimson star seemed somehow familiar. I must have studied about it before, but it seemed to have slipped my memory. And to make it worse, all my notes on that star were gone, eaten by the looks of it. The cold breeze swept through the room. I stared at the star again, and it clicked. Yeah, the house. Yesterday, I saw the same star on the walls of his house. And as if to confirm it all, cold laughter wafted through the room, making my hair stand on end. I clenched my fists until they turned white. I would not rest until that demon was gone. I swear on it. The laughter came again, this time from downstairs, and I burst into the kitchen to find nothing. Nothing but the head of a raccoon on the kitchen table. It was nearly severed, showing only the blood vessels jutting out. Its eyes rolled backwards, showing only the whites. As I watched, its whiskers quivered with fear before it became still again. Shadows danced behind the curtain. It was my sister, laughing, drinking something out of a wine glass. More blood seeped underneath the curtain as she refilled the glass. My hand went to my mouth. Junior was nowhere to be found. Images flashed into my mind of my young nephew on a tree somewhere, or on a wall, nailed down with his head dangling like that of the raccoon. I shivered. My heart leapt in my throat. My brain screamed at me to go find him. But I couldn't. I was stuck. I ripped open the curtain, cross at the ready, to find no one there. Well, she was gone as quickly as she'd appeared. Maria! My thoughts were going out of control. Tears welled into my eyes. I struggled to find what to say next. I'll find Junior. We'll do this together. The demon will not win. I fled. Didn't know how long I was in that study, but the daylight seemed to have vanished into a deep shade of gold. Shadows emerged and formed intricate patterns that crawled against the walls like branches of a tree. Then the shadows fled to what looked like a huge spider, scuttling across the walls. I swung my light around, but it was gone. My wife was laughing. Whatever that was hissing. My head was spinning. Junior, I called out. I wanted to sound brave, but my voice was so small. I crept around the house. Junior. He wasn't in the study. Junior. He wasn't in the bedrooms. Junior. He wasn't in the yard. It was still watching me, the thing. I could feel the way its gaze bore down on my back. I kept on hearing heavy breathing, a heart quivering with excitement. But when I turned around, yelling, bottle at the ready, it was gone. The treehouse was the last place I checked. Junior loved that place. Back before he was sick, he'd spend every waking moment there, rocking in his hammock, gazing at the blue sky and the clouds drifting lazily by, or spend his afternoons drawing with his crayons. Now the hammock swung with the wind, and the planks creaked under my footsteps like a haunted house. New drawings were on the walls, but it depicted the same symbol over and over. The 5-pointed crimson star. I forced myself to ignore the star, grit my teeth, and began to search. Hammock, rug, dusty corners. Again, hammock, rug, dusty corners. It began to get increasingly harder as the sun went down and the light began to fade, and so I carefully placed one of my purifying candles on the wooden table and moved to light it. But then I felt a whoosh of air, and then something heavy clubbed me in the head, and the candle clattered onto the floor. I turned around, and my heart, which had been thrashing in my chest like a wild animal from worry and paranoia, now came to a complete halt. Oh, she towered over me, 2 or 3 times my height. Her belly was swollen, stretched beyond the normal limit, and I could see red veins bulging from her arms that were as thick as tree trunks. She roared again, raised what I now recognized as an axe from the garage, and swung it down, only just missing my head. The table was cleanly split into half. I backed away, and she advanced, the axe swinging madly in her hands. At that same time, the last of the sun slipped onto her face, and I nearly dropped everything I was so desperately holding. Maria. But it was not the Maria I knew. Her eyes were bloodshot. She moved with an awkward clumsiness that didn't seem like herself. Far below the treehouse, I could see somebody waving their hands as if conducting a fancy orchestra. Somebody with the body shape and size of a huge spider. Somebody scuttling towards my direction. I had 10 seconds. "Maria," I choked out. "Please." She was almost on me now. She dropped the axe and her hands crawled up to my throat. Her breath was on my face. I squirmed, but I was trapped under her grip. "Maria," I hissed. "Fight it." She never will. The voice was too familiar, too small, too much like that same little boy who could brighten my day just by walking into the room. That same boy who was wolfing down sausages this very morning with a big grin on his face. Oh, no. "Why, Uncle?" Junior drawled. His eyes gleamed red in the twilight. The crimson star was carved onto his chest now, gleaming with blood. He raised both his arms and Maria got off me and marched to his side. He advanced on me, his now forked tongue flicking from side to side. "Get out of my nephew," I howled. My palms were sweating. I scrambled onto my feet and forced myself to move. "Get out of him," Junior repeated, mocking. He held his head like he pretended not to understand, and then let out a large guffaw. "Oh, on the contrary, Uncle. I'll have the joy of finishing you off myself, for everything you've done to us." I set the candle back on its stand and lit it. My hands were shaking so badly I was afraid I might accidentally burn the treehouse down. The flame went out feebly. I struck another match. "It's not working. Give up and come to me, Uncle. It'll make things so much easier." "Oh, come on, come on." The flame was too weak. It went down slower and slower, and I bit my nails and held my breath. Then it finally exploded into light, and the treehouse was bathed in orange and yellow and gold. Junior hissed in pain, and his eyes went wide. He backed quickly into the corner. It was time. I laid my right hand onto him and placed my cross on his forehead. Oh, Junior screamed. Smoke was coming out from where the cross met his skin. Then, before I even started to pray, he dissolved into a mound of black ash. More rained down from the roof, flooding the treehouse, spilling over onto the ground. I looked to my left and saw my sister was crumbling too. First her legs, then her belly, and then her head. Blood gushed out and baked the ash into something hard. I was left with the graves of the only family I'd ever known. I knelt in front of them and said a final goodbye, my tears falling like the ashes scattered around me. Then I wordlessly blew out the candle, climbed down the rope ladder, and looked at the shadow of the treehouse for the last time. Every step back to the main house was heavier than the last. I stared at the flickering flames of the candle as the night danced on around me. I scrolled through my phone, staring at pictures of my family, eating ice cream, playing at the beach, normal family stuff that made everything so worth it. Until my life was ruined by the same thing I swore to protect them from. My resolve hardened, and I made a promise right then and there that I would fight the demons that haunted this world and send them back to where they came from. That no one else would get hurt. And, as if God himself was listening, the phone rang. "Hello, is this Father Peter?" It was a young woman, early 20s, and her voice sounded strange. "My sister's here in my body, and I can't sleep anymore. Get her out so we can both be at peace. Please." "Oh, shut up, Cam. He can't help you. Besides, you know you deserve it." Then the line went dead. The lady, Cam, had sent an address. I gathered up my things and packed them into my knapsack. Yes, tonight will be a new night. A night of change. But as I strode down the road to take the first bus, I felt something wake up inside me. "Hello, Father Peter." I nearly dropped my things. I scanned the surroundings, my heart thumping away in my chest. Nothing. Yeah, maybe it was just the events of the night. Every little thing was making me jump. The sun began to rise, illuminating the silent forest around me. Yeah, it was nothing. Yet my heartbeat was quickening again. I couldn't help but look around as I climbed the steps of the bus. The voice gave out another hearty chuckle. Once again a shiver ran up my spine. My left hand was twitching involuntarily. "I loved your nephew. And as for you, let's dance." Ghostwhispers.io by Corpse Child. "Hey, you want to dance, cat?" I looked in the direction I thought her voice was coming from. Jenna was smiling at me, crooning to me. God, I'd wanted this chance for fucking years. Yeah. I straightened up and then with a little more confidence shouted, "Hell yeah." I got up and walked over to her, putting on the color-coded headphones. I took her hand as she led me out to the middle of the dance floor. There I gave a thumbs up to the designated DJ to crank our music up. We got the blue DJ, the good one, so me, her, and about 3 other people were shaking and rocking out to Convict Christ and a few other techno-metal artists, while everyone else were listening to God only knew or cared what. 30 seconds. Half a minute. That's how long my little taste of heaven lasted. About 10 seconds later, I remember hearing a faint screaming noise. Actually, multiple screams would be accurate. Still, faint being the key word, which meant I easily swept it off to keep dancing with Jenna. Well, that lasted almost another 15 seconds before I noticed that everyone had stopped dancing. Everyone was now looking toward the back of the dance room, toward the hall. The music was still playing in the headphones, so I took them off to immediately be met with screams and gasps and, "Oh my God!" Jenna had taken hers off now at this point, and I looked at her. I was about to ask if she knew anything about what the hell was going on, but the bewildered look on her face took care of that for me. She was craning her neck to look out and over the throng of people to see the hallway. I did the same, with no luck from me either. Jenna started moving closer to the crowd. I tried staying behind her, but we were quickly separated, only about a quarter of the way through the crowd. Trying to wade through the crowd was like trying to wade through an audience at a rock concert. Maybe even made all the worse here because of the apparent hysteria. Jenna! I called out, trying desperately to spot her again. I couldn't see her anywhere. A little way further through the crowd, I heard one of the girls overhead shriek at the top of their lungs, damn near killing me right then and there of a heart attack. Right then, I was stuck between just freezing up where I was and wanting to push and fight my way further through the crowd. I was terrified of what I'd find ahead, but more so, of course, about what might have happened to Jenna. And with that, I ended up electing the latter. Something far easier said than done. Or by luck or sheer willpower, though, I actually managed to get myself close enough to the front of the crowd to start seeing what was going on. I couldn't see much, with a lot of the taller people there standing right at the front. I could see that someone was on the ground, twitching and twisting spasmodically. Heart racing, I managed to spot Jenna just to my right, and I went to her. Yeah, what's going on? Who is that? Her head snapped suddenly to me, wide-eyed and startled, before exchanging glances between me and the person on the ground ahead. I don't know. My gaze returned to the guy on the floor. I could hear choked sort of gurgling noises, almost like he was trying to talk, but he was being choked while doing so. He had one hand clawing at his throat, with the other clawing at his eyes, so much so I could faintly see streams of blood running down his face. Oh my God, I think he's choking, I cried. No one moved. Here, move. I violently shoved my way past the two grillers in front of me to rush to the guy's side. As bad as he was flopping around on the ground, I had a hell of a time trying to lift him up to a sitting position so I could try giving him the Heimlich maneuver. Sir, I called to him. Sir, my name's Catherine Danvers. I'm going to give you the Heimlich maneuver, okay? Just try to hold still for me. He continued bucking wildly against me. Sir, please, I called out again. Nothing. I saw then that his headphones were still on. After a second of readjusting, I managed to pull his headphones off. Sir, my name is... I was cut off when his body abruptly seized, followed by him blasting out the most horrific, most startling, and just the single most unnatural scream I'd ever heard in my life, and, well, all I would ever hear. I instantly let go of him, and he dropped to the ground, stiff as a board. His scream lasted for almost a full 30 seconds, long enough for it to be forever seared into my memory. Even after he stopped, well, at least when I was pretty sure it wasn't him. The scream itself still lingered in the air like a foul smell, passing itself through everyone else gathered around as well. The guy laid now on the ground in front of me, lifeless and frozen in this weird, freakish-looking upward thrust with his back bent off the ground, stomach facing the ceiling. My own body froze as well, stuck with my knees huddled to my chest, almost in a fetal position, shaking. For a moment, time seemed to really freeze all throughout the club. Each set of eyes from the crowd was fixed on me, mouths hanging halfway to the floor. Someone finally managed to break the stupor by pulling out their phone and calling the cops. Everyone else then started filing out in an unorganized, utterly manic manner. Not me, though. I couldn't even force myself to try and make any part of me move. I couldn't even take my eyes off of the guy's body either. My eyes were fixed on his, with his staring back at me, blank and soulless. His scream, despite having died out everywhere else in the club building, continued echoing in my own head. I couldn't place it at that moment, but I knew something about it wasn't natural. Something about it was, I don't know, just wrong. I stayed in entropy like this until I was shaken back to the real world by Jenna shaking my shoulder. Cat, she called out, rocking me gently. Cat, you okay, babe? My head snapped to her, then again one last time to the body, then back to her before absently nodding yes. Come on, let's get out of here. She helped me up and the two of us joined the rest outside. Everyone was asking each other frantically what they all thought was going on. Jenna and I just stood waiting for the authorities to arrive. It was only another minute or so before they did. The crowd was then divided and questioned individually, but I refused to leave Jenna's side. Jenna and I were pulled to the side and asked for our side of the story. I had no idea what the hell any of the other people were saying about me, but judging from the rather suspicious looks on their faces, I could tell something was being spun against me. The both of us did our damnedest to emphasize the fact that I was only there to help the guy, that he'd been seizing even before I'd touched him. I could see, though, that this did about as much to convince them as if I just stayed silent. In either case, Jenna and I were still good to go home. I was about to walk to my car when Jenna stopped me, offering to give me a ride back with her. "There's no way I'm letting you go home by yourself after that," she declared. I'd have protested, but I'd known by that point, having already been good friends with her for at least 2 years by that time, and when she put her foot down like she was here, it wasn't wise to question or refuse unless you were willing to risk your ass being the next place her foot went. That was, admittedly, one of the reasons I wanted to be more with her. Always the more headstrong of the two of us, while I was always the more calculated one. Of course, this also meant that I'd get to bunk overnight at her place. An even bigger plus, even if neither me nor her were in any mood to fool around. The ride was silent, almost suffocatingly so. I could tell both of us wanted to say something about it, but, well, what? What really could be said other than it was the single most horrifying thing either of us had witnessed in our lives? It wasn't until we got back to her place that either one of us spoke to the other. "Hey, you okay?" she asked me. I looked at her, my face probably shaking and obviously anxious. She started toward me. I held my hands up. "Oh, I'll be okay. It's just..." I looked down to the floor and then to the TV. My body was sort of on autopilot while my brain ran amok. "Just what?" My attention snapped back to her. "I don't know. Just so crazy. I mean, what was that?" "Hell, if I'd know, honey." She threw off her jacket before heading to her kitchen. I stood where I was, losing my focus to the TV again. "Hey, want a cold one?" she asked. Without taking my eyes away again, I replied, "Yeah, sure." She told me to take a load off on the couch, so I trudged over and plopped down in the center cushion. She joined me 5 seconds later with a 6-pack of Millers and a bottle of Harwood Canadian. Well, ever since we were a couple of freshman girls, it was our favorite little combo for when it was the two of us. "Here, kitty cat. This'll take the edge off." I offered her a weak half-smile before taking and downing a decent swig of the Miller. For about the next minute and a half, the two of us drank in silence until, finally, having gotten herself a nice little buzz going, she looked at me and asked, "Hey, still want to dance, kitty cat?" I rolled my head to her. By that point I was well under, though not enough to get blacked out. A grin stretched across my face. "Fuck yeah," I slurred excitedly. "Look, I've got a new CD I wanted you to check out. Remember that little band we used to listen to? Seraphim, yeah?" I nodded my head. Oh, how could I forget? The band that her, me, and a couple of other friends originally only listened to see if its little supposed curse was real. I even noticed she still had a few of their CDs. She pulled out her phone then and held up her music playlist to me. She pointed to one of the songs at the top of the list and said, "Hey, check it." The song was titled something weird. Six Cries 6. Briefly scanning a couple of the other songs below it, I saw that they were all titled like this, all of them looking like a weird serial code or something. Yeah, this techno group called ghostwhispers.io. Cool. I continued looking at the track. The album art was a sort of sloppily drawn skeleton wearing headphones. And that was it. Yeah, you'll love it, I promise. She downed another swallow of her drink before going over and connecting her Bluetooth surround sound speakers to her phone. You ready? She hit the play button on the song. I was confused for a second when nothing happened. I looked at Jenna, who held her finger up, winking. Eventually, I began to hear it. It sounded like a low sort of rumbling noise that very, very slowly built in pitch and tempo. And imagine the stomping footsteps of an elephant approaching you. It was a lot like that if the footsteps also got higher in pitch the closer they came. Several wave-like sounds then came from the speakers that, at first, made me think the opening riff was about to cue, except it wasn't. Instead, 2 or 3 more of them passed through the room. Following this was a weird sort of heartbeat sound that, after a few more passing waves, well, the 2 sounds synchronized with one another. I looked at Jenna again. She had her eyes closed, bopping her neck back and forth. I couldn't understand, because not only was there no music, well, at least nothing I'd have considered music, but her head bops weren't even in rhythm with the actual sounds themselves. The rhythm stayed the same, steadily growing higher and higher in pitch, yet her bopping was much more erratic by comparison. Then, when I'd say the rhythm from the song reached about a mid-range sound, I started to notice something about the wave sounds, or rather I should say, sobbing sounds. I don't know how best to describe the sound other than what you'd think of if you imagine 2 or 3 whales simultaneously crying deep underwater. It was low and incoherent, and yet all the same I could somewhat feel this cloud of overwhelming sadness, as well as a sense of ominous dread coming from it. When it started getting louder and louder, so too did the bass blasting from the speakers, causing my entire body to vibrate inside and out. Jenna still wasn't bothered by this, though. I started to wonder if, somehow, we were listening to a different song altogether. Then I heard a noise like an extremely deep voice come from the speaker saying, "By man's will, the Almighty weeps." As garbled as it was, that's really only my best guess as to what I'd heard. Whatever it was, though, was immediately followed by this high-pitched squeal, sort of like a guitar trill that almost immediately broke my eardrums, literally to a point where, even to this day, I actually still have a hard time really hearing anything. I looked over to Jenna, who had her face contorted in a silent sort of scream, kind of like when you're listening to a heavy song and you react by screaming like the vocalist is. It was like that, only she was perfectly still. In fact, so was everything else. It took a second, but I actually noticed that the speakers weren't vibrating anymore, not like they were earlier. As well as this, my own body wasn't vibrating anymore, even though the bass was still blasting from the speakers. I tried to look around the room, but I couldn't move my head. Only my eyes, and even that was more of a struggle than it should have been. I noticed too that the room was turning grayscale. The LED lights Jenna had around her living room now weren't coloured or glowing. Jenna herself even looked like this. The screeching noise by now was a sort of droning ambience in the background. I started hearing more voices coming through the speakers, mixing and distorting as they came closer toward me. I couldn't make out anything they were saying, except for one thing, screamed at me in another language. Deus sumus, et flemus a te, parasitus et finiendus es. This too then dispersed into a multitude of other crying voices. They were all mixed too. Some were men's voices, some women, some of them were even children's voices. They were mixed languages too, like the one from earlier. All of them were saying different things at the same time, none of which I could understand, but whatever it was done so out of fright. I'd be almost willing to swear this carried on for hours, but as I found out only a second later, only 3 minutes had passed since this all began. Eventually the music ended, and I saw everything normally again. Came to, I saw Jenna grinning at me. So, what'd you think? Part 2. I didn't reply, and her face fell into one of concern. Kitty cat, anyone home? I didn't answer. And the world felt normal again, but I still couldn't make myself move. Not even out of shock or anything either, but like something was actually holding me perfectly still. Cat! She came over and started shaking me. In my mind, I could almost feel my lungs tearing from how much I was screaming out to her, but no sound actually came out. Cat, come on, baby. Catherine! I heard her voice start to jumble like the ones from the beat earlier. My name started to twist and morph into other words in her distorted voice, words I couldn't understand except for this phrase, hominum flebit, repeating over and over. Jenna began slapping me to wake up, but I couldn't even feel it, or anything for that matter. My body was essentially a vegetable, only really conscious inside my own head. I could see and hear, but not move or feel. It wasn't until long afterward that I knew that I wasn't dreaming any of this, or dead, when I watched and heard Jenna call 911, who showed up about 15 minutes later and took me to the hospital where I woke up, so to speak. During all of this, my mind was screaming, along with the other 100 million, possibly billion other voices I was hearing screaming those two words to me. When it all stopped finally at the hospital, I found Jenna asleep in the chair next to my bed, her hand holding mine gently. I moved my hand, my head to look around, and even wiggled my toes. I could move my body again. I was back. Jenna stirred awake soon after. Well, good morning, kitty cat, she said with a groaning, sort of early morning chuckle. I looked at her, my face a mix of confusion and exhaustion. Oh, good, you're actually moving too. Jenna, I said groggily. What in the hell happened? Why am I here? She scoffed dryly and replied, I was kind of hoping you'd tell me, sugar. Well, I just kept staring at her. You don't remember last night? I squinted my eyes, rubbing my head, which was pounding like crazy for some reason. I don't. Look, how are you doing this morning? Jenna and I both looked to see the doctor entering the room then. I exchanged glances between him and Jenna before answering. Still groggy, but I was fine. He had me then sit up and start going through all the regular checkup routines before tapping my knees with a mallet. Oh, my reflexes were fine, but when he attempted to check my hearing, something weird happened. Whenever he hit the button to trigger the beep in the headphones I was wearing, I didn't hear the beep, but instead the phrase from before. Hominum flebit. I still raised my hand when I heard it for the first few times, but then, after about the 7th or 8th time, I felt my body go stiff again. This time, along with the abandonment of my senses, I could feel something heavy sort of stuff itself inside my head, like it was a glass jar. You know how when you eat too much, your body feels like a giant brick of lead has replaced your organs? Well, this was like that, only it was all inside my head. Nowhere else, and instead of food, instead of something tangible, it was filled with a low, deep sobbing noise from the song. And the pressure alone made my head prone to explode. The sounds in it got louder and louder as well, silencing the world around me. I couldn't take it anymore, but when I opened my mouth to scream, I couldn't make any sort of sound. I mean, not at all. Not even a whimper or gasping or wheezing. Nothing. I could barely even breathe, in fact. One of the worst parts about this was, thanks to my mind being as infested as it was, I couldn't even scream internally. What the fuck? Like I wanted to. I couldn't form any of my own thoughts. My mind was as empty as my body this time. The only sign this time that I was still alive was my sight. I could see Jenna and the doctor calling out to me and shaking me again, but now I couldn't feel or hear them. I remember being wheeled out of that room and back into the OR. Another thing that scared me about this was just how slow time seemed to move. I mean, I couldn't have been in the audiology room for any more than 10 or 20 minutes. Yet I could almost swear that I was in that room for 2 hours. The same with when they wheeled me down the hallway to the OR. That hallway stretched for a frickin' eternity, despite being only a couple of rooms away from the audiologists. In the OR, I watched figures all around me scrambling with various surgical implements. I could tell from their body language that they were all panicking, though about what exactly I couldn't really tell, except that it was to try to revive me. I must have been in critical condition, I thought. God, I'm gonna die. The whole time, all I could hear was the sobbing and crying in my head. Even my screams were silenced by them too. Imagine for a moment that you're a dummy, a wooden puppet, and you know you're a puppet, and you're forced to watch the world around you while someone else is talking for you. You want to scream out with your own voice, but you can't because you essentially have no voice of your own. That's exactly what this was, save for the fact that only I could hear the voice that wasn't mine. This time I have no idea how much time had actually passed before I came out of this spell, because it was a while before it even registered that I was actually back. A sort of delayed effect, like it all stopped, but you don't even realize it because of just how overstimulated your brain was. Eventually, though, I did come out of it, to find myself in the hospital room I was in before. I couldn't tell where I was at first, because of the way everything was happening so fast, feeling like the 9th acid trip I never had. I cleaned myself up after the 8th. And it also hadn't registered to me that I'd been moved here. It was dark, the clock beside me reading 10:30 p.m. I picked my head up as much as I could and tried looking around the room. Jenna! No one answered. I was alone in the room. My head fell back down and I just stared back at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't move. Well, not much anyways. I just lay in bed and stared at the frickin' ceiling. Ironically, I felt the quiet was just as detrimental to me mentally as the voices screaming in my head were. At least with that, something was happening. God only knew what, but it was something. But now, though, I was all alone. My thoughts were mine, sure, but that was far from consoling. All I could think was that I was starting to lose my mind, and there was no fathomable reason as to why. I don't have a history of mental illness. I've been clean from drugs, like I mentioned before, for over 3 years now. I knew that I wasn't making any of this shit up, despite how much I actually wished to God that I was. The only thing I could connect any of this shit to was that song. That made me start thinking a little bit. The song itself was called God Cries, and the track sounded like someone was crying, not to mention the words themselves that kept repeating in my head, which I was starting to realize sounded like Latin. What was said, though, well, I'd had no idea at the time. Couldn't look it up yet either, because I didn't have my phone with me. The next morning, a nurse came in and went through the routine checkup. And just like before, my reflexes were slower than they should have been, even more so than the previous day, in fact. Not to mention my body feeling even more still than before as well. Each movement of any of my muscles ate like crazy. Afterwards, though, I still asked if I could have my phone brought to me. She agreed, somewhat reluctantly for some reason, and then brought it to me. After she left, the first thing I did was to check my messages to see if Jenna may have said anything. Maybe hey, I'm worried about you. Call or text me when you get this to let me know everything's okay. Love you. Or some shit like that. Sadly, there was no such message, or any message at all, from her. Next, I opened Google to search the meaning for the phrase homonym flabit, and the other phrases from the music. Before I even got that far, though, an article from my newsfeed caught my eye. It was a club from 2 nights ago, with a headline reading, "Owner of nightclub sued for soliciting illegally pirated music and the death of a patron." Curious now, I clicked on it and read the article. Apparently one of the tracks that was playing that night was done so without the artist's knowledge, and they found out because, following the incident, the police investigation revealed that the track the guy was listening to, the designated song for his color group, was that from a particular artist. Well, you probably see where this is going, but I'll tell you that it honestly shocked me the first time I saw it. The artist was ghostwhispers.io. More specifically, Rolf E. Cole, the apparent mind behind the madness. Rolf was quoted in saying that his music was more than an art, but a gift to the Elder Ones, and explained that because of that, he required a high price for any individual or media platform to download, use, or even listen to his music. A sign of tribute to the ones below, as he put it. A bit overcompensating, I know, but art is art, I guess. Well, each to their own. The point was that the club had been playing his music despite him refusing to allow it after failing to agree to his lofty price arrangement. This compelled me to want to look further into Rolf E. Cole and see exactly what ghostwhispers.io was actually about. After spending about 30 minutes trying to find anything about it, other than the lawsuit and the incident at the club, I finally settled on an old Facebook page from Rolf himself. Judging from the fact that the last post that had been made by the account was from all the way back in 2009, I knew that any information I'd find here would be outdated at best. Still, I was able to sift through and learn that Rolf E. Cole, to no real surprise, used to be an active Satanist and ran an old group on there known as the Whispering Ghosts from Below. Now, I'm in no way religious. I don't have anything against those that are. Your beliefs are your own. But I'll say right now that the shit I read on the old post from this guy and a few of the others in his little niche was nothing short of frickin' bizarre. I really can't explain much of it, but basically, these wingnuts believed in preaching about the coming of what they called the Elder Spirit. None of them could give any consistent details on what the Elder One was, or what they did. Some gave a more or less weird spin on the story of Genesis, where others tried putting elements from Lovecraft books to create this pseudo-fan fiction for it. Rolf E. Cole himself, however, oddly enough, didn't seem to take part in this. In fact, his philosophy was that only by speaking with the Elder One themselves could you even begin to understand what they are or what and why they do the things they do. If you're wondering just how to do that, there's actually a list he put together on how to somehow pull this off. But you're insane if you think I'm going to list it here. Suffice to say, it's a long and extremely dangerous process. Somewhere along the way, though, there was a sort of disconnect, some sort of point in time where the Whispering Ghosts drifted apart from one another, with fewer and fewer posts being made and less chat among the members. From what I could see, there wasn't any sort of falling out between any of them, or Rolf himself, but rather just a growing apathy between them all. That is, except for Rolf, who, up until the last post made in late 2011, kept up the most, and pretty much only, activity throughout the group. For the most part, the posts contained mostly just drawings or descriptions, or portents, as he called them. God, a real whack job, this one. Can't stress this enough. Yeah, portents about the Elder One's rising. Drawings were, at least the best I could make of it, of something similar to those freakish, biblically accurate angels, being a giant mass of assorted eyeballs surrounded by a generated aura of some sort of energy or something. Some showed something similar to this, but instead of just a ball of eyes, the Elder One had the body of a person with the eyes embedded all across its body, with the exception of its face, which was blank. The dreams were more or less the same psychotic shit you'd expect a burgeoning cult leader to ramble on about, being all, "I've just dreamed of the almighty Elder One's awakening to hail the apocalypse," and other such shit. It was in mid-2010 when the group had really lost traction that Rolf started talking about making music. It started with small posts, similar to the ones of his portents, where he'd describe how he'd hear and transcribe the prophecies of the Elder One. And then he'd start leaving audio tracks in posts. Finally, come the end of the year, he'd start uploading the tracks to SoundCloud and start posting links to them there. This continued right up until the last post made at the end of 2011, like I mentioned earlier. Well, at first it seemed like there was potential for Rolf to reignite interest in the group with his music, with members engaging in the posts, commenting on the tracks themselves. Well, it didn't last terribly long. The last post was Rolf saying, "The Elder One has chosen me as his prophet, and I have spoken. You have all closed your ears and your hearts to him. Do as you will, but with or without disciples of my own, I will continue his good work." I tried to click on the SoundCloud links, only to find the account and the tracks were no longer there. No surprise, I guess, considering the lawsuits. And that got me wondering then, just how in the hell did the club owner have the track playing to begin with if he didn't pay for it? In that same vein, how did Jenna even hear about it? The solution? Ask the club owner himself. Part 3. That day I went through my routine checkup with no further incidents. At least none as extreme as that. The next few days progressed like this, with the only weird thing to occur being the occasional nightmare here and there, or the odd auditory hallucinations sometimes when I'd walk down the halls to the bathroom or lie in bed. Well, I still can't say whether or not it was necessarily a good thing that I'd become so desensitized to it by that point that it meant next to nothing for me to repeatedly hear hominum flebit in my ear by about 100 different people in the floor just below the Whacker Lodge, but nevertheless, I didn't make any sort of scene with it. I still had control over my body and my senses. I guess that was enough for me. Either that or my mind has a twisted sense of humor all its own. Anyway, it was enough of a charade to swindle the doctors and nurses to deem me safe to go back home without hurting myself or anyone else just a few days following. I called Jenna that afternoon to come pick me up. She was there a few minutes past noon. "Hey, listen, I'm sorry I haven't called," she said immediately after I got in the car. "It's okay," I replied. "I have a favor to ask you, though." She raised her eyebrows. "Can you drive us by the club?" She chuckled. "Wow, 5 days in the hospital and the first thing you think about is wanting to go dancing?" She threw her head back, laughing. I just stared at her. "Oh, shit, you're serious?" Her eyes passed rapidly back and forth between the car, clock, and me. "Hell, kitty cat, I don't even think the place is open. What are you even wanting to go there for, especially when it's only noon?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. To be honest, up to that point, I hadn't really thought of what to say. I just kind of thought she'd go along with it. Even if she had a point and the place probably wasn't open, it wouldn't likely be until around 10 that night at the earliest. I wasn't sure what to tell her about Ghost Whispers, I.O., the stuff that I'd found online. At the same time, I needed to talk to the club owner, see what he knew or how the hell he'd even got the track to begin with. In the end, I went with pulling out my phone and showing her the article about the lawsuit. The first reaction was confusion, then shock, and then something of interest, giving the phone the same look she sometimes gave me when we drunk together late at night. "Oh, I see. You're trying to learn more about the band, huh?" She winked and added, "Atta girl." It's more than just that, Jen. I opened the Facebook links. The dude was nuts, and I want to know how and why they got the track illegally. She raised an eyebrow then and gave me a patronizing smile. God, I told you watch too many crime shows. I sighed and stared pleadingly. Oh, come on, not the puppy eyes. You know I can't resist that. Somewhat amused, somewhat relieved she was caving, I made my eyes cartoonishly bigger and more pathetic looking. Oh, all right, she said finally, throwing the car in gear and driving out of the hospital parking lot. We arrived at the club about 5 or 6 minutes later. Admittedly, Jenna might have had a point with the club probably not even being open because the parking lot was the most deserted that I'd ever seen it. We got out and went to the door, knocking as usual. Fortunately, Jenna always remembered the club's secret knock because I never could. It was a certain rhythm that was taught to all the paid members like Jenna and I. Sort of like a gang sign, if you will, that lets them know that you're a member. For almost 3 minutes, the two of us just stood there like a couple of the idiots we'd always hear about who didn't know the secret knock and were left standing all alone outside. She and I used to make jokes about it. Jenna turned to me, giving me a sarcastic look and said, "I told you, dum-dum," without telling me. I was actually about to try my hand at the knocking when I heard the bolt on the door slide back. We took a step back and the door soon opened. Tanner, the door guy, stood in the doorway eyeing us, wondering why the hell we'd be here so early. "Hey, the owner here?" I asked. "Yeah, but he's a bit tied up at the moment. Why?" "We need to..." Jenna cleared her throat. "Okay, I need to talk to him about the other night." He scoffed and said, "Good luck and get in line. Fuckers from the recording studios and the courthouse have been chomping away at him all morning. The way this shit's going, it's probably going to be yet another couple of nights before we can get this in order and open up again." "Look, I promise it'll only take a minute." I was cut off when I heard the sound of shouting coming from down the hall. I couldn't make out much other than something about "motherfucking whore. God, son of a cocksucking whore." I exchanged glances between Tanner and the hallway, and he grimaced. You see what I mean now?" he asked. "Yeah, but still, I need to ask him something." His eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Come on, sweetheart. You really want to go pissing the big man off after hearing that? Here, why don't you tell me and I'll give him the message." I sighed and was about to turn back when Jenna stepped up. "Look, dude," she said in that same, I'm about 2 seconds from planting my foot in your ass tone that I was talking about earlier. "My girl here said she needed to talk to the guy, okay? Now, you gonna let her through, or am I gonna have to lay you out like a little bitch while Cat here gets it on video for the world to see?" Well, Tanner looked at her, and then to me, back to her before stepping aside. I almost couldn't believe that actually worked. Jenna was tough, sure, but I honestly figured Tanner, built as he was, keep in mind he was also the bouncer for the place, that he'd be able to take her in a one-on-one. Regardless, the two of us waltzed right in toward the room at the end of the hall. Right when I reached the door, I heard a low humming sort of noise, a droning, so to speak. It was low, almost like a buzzing noise. I stopped from opening the door and instead started listening. The droning remained low for almost 3 minutes before I heard this garbled, rumbling sort of voice say something I think like, "Vigilamus, si creatio ardet." A shiver passed down my back at the sound of the low-toned Latin. My arm shook, caught stuck between wanting to throw open the door and rush in and wanting to rush back to the exit. Jenna, noticing my hesitation, took charge and threw the door open for me. The both of us then froze in shock when we saw the owner of the club splayed out on the floor, seizing violently. The droning sound was deafening. I was forced to bend down and cover my ears when I heard the music let out a huge wave of synth noise, and the voice repeated, "Vigilamus, sic creatio are dead." This time, though, I noticed the voice wasn't actually coming from the speakers in the room at all, but instead from the guy himself. His eyes were bugging, and his mouth was wide open, almost impossibly so. I was about to rush and try to help him when Jenna threw her arm out in front of me, stopping me. That was when, in a single motion so quick that it was startling, plus a bit painful to watch, the guy shot upright, staring right at me and Jenna, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. From there, he started jerking while disjointedly standing up. Jenna grabbed my arm and pulled us toward the door when it slammed itself shut, jamming itself in place. Jenna tried pulling and pulling, even battering against it with her shoulder, but it wouldn't budge. And the droning was now heart-stoppingly loud. God, I could feel it, like it was actually part of the air itself. It was an all-consuming force. The owner took a disjointed step forward, and the two of us stepped back in response. "Damn it, it won't open," Jenna shouted above the droning. The owner's jaw distended, and the deep, distorted voice spoke. "We awake, and thus creation burns." "What?" I asked, too confused to even properly be terrified. He took another step. With each second, his body jerked more and more, actively dislocating and relocating several of his bones simultaneously. "We have been awakened after thousands of years, and we've heard the call. Creation's time has come. Now it must end, starting now, with you." "Who are you?" Jenna yelled. "We are the elders of all creation." My eyes grew. The man stopped suddenly, doubling over in pain. I watched bright, glowing orbs of light appear all over his body, followed with him screaming in a way that resembled 100 people screaming in pain all at the same time. The orbs began to char and burn themselves into his skin like cattle brandings before revealing themselves as a multitude of eyeballs. They were all different colors and twitching anxiously all over his body. Jenna screamed, "What the?" I just froze. I couldn't feel my heart pound away in my chest. The man, the thing, whatever the hell you want to call it, took 2 more disjointed steps towards us. Jenna was back to beating on the door, shouting, "Hey, open up! Get us out of here!" "He can't save you. No one can." His arm raised, and Jenna was suddenly thrown from the door into the wall. Before my brain could even register what had just happened, the man's arm raised again to the ceiling, causing a handful of the electrical cords to coil around her wrists and ankles, suspending her in the air. She struggled furiously but couldn't break herself free. I watched the prongs of the different plugs embed themselves into her arms, causing her to cry out in sharp pain. The cords started to glow bright orange, and the smell of burnt matches filled the room. Plumes of smoke started to rise from the different points where the plugs were embedded into her arms. Her eyes rolled back, and her body started to shake and twist. I ran to save her, but was stopped before I even made my 5th step by a rogue cord that had suddenly come to life as well, wrapping around my leg and likewise stabbing my thigh with its prongs. Immediately I felt something searing the nerves in my leg before then feeling nothing at all. I wrestled furiously, but just like with Jenna, this thing had me stuck fast and I wasn't going anywhere. I looked up to see black spots growing all across her arms and all the way up to and around her shoulders. Others were even forming up her neck. I reached out to keep trying to pull myself to her, but I couldn't move. Smoke then began coming out of her mouth, and blood rained down from her eyes. "Jenna!" I screamed. I then turned to the figure, still holding its arm outstretched. "What are you doing to her?" The figure turned to face me, but didn't speak. Instead, the voice came from Jenna, whose jaw now moved up and down, all wonky, like she was trying to talk while it was broken.
I told you, we are bringing creation's end. We have seen the error in its creation, and we can no longer stand for it.
In seconds, the lights from the room blinked rapidly for a couple of seconds before going out completely. The room began to glow again when Jenna's body emanated a bright orange aura, just like the club owner's body had done before. Her eyes were gone, with all the other ones from before now opening up across her body. Her jaw began to move again, and she said,
"This will suit us nicely. She is one of our strongest disciples. Thus she will be our voice to the world."
She ended this with a screech that almost immediately deafened me.
"Jenna!"
I cried out, feebly attempting once again to wrestle my foot free from the cord.
"Let her go, you son of a bitch." "We cannot. We will not. She is with us now."
The eyes twitching intensified, as did the glowing around them.
"She'll be the voice of life's end, the bugle of the end of days." "No, I'll do whatever you want, okay? Just give Jenna back to me."
And then struggled forward again. And this made the prong sink itself deeper into my thigh. It would have hurt like hell had the electrical surge not fried all the nerves, until a black patch had formed all around the muscle itself. Still, I couldn't move, even if I'd been able to rip my leg free without feeling anything.
"You're of no use to us. Your mind was weak when you heard our call, but hers is strong. Only the strong can vessel us."
Before I had any time to think about anything, I was yanked back by my leg and hurled into the back wall, smashing into the control panel in front of the recording room. The impact of my body, small and mousy as it was, totaled the panel itself, causing several sparks to shoot out everywhere, catching the carpet floor aflame. It only took about 5 seconds for the entire floor to turn into an inferno, and only a further 3 before the flames were going up the wall. My consciousness didn't last any longer than that, though, having cracked my head hard against the panel. I was out cold, too. No voices, no dreams, nothing. Just silence, which made me think I was finally done in until just a few moments later, at least I'm assuming only a few moments, when I was being shaken awake by Tanner and a couple of firemen. My head felt light, and when I opened my mouth to take a breath in, smoke and carbon stuffed themselves like lead weights into my lungs, and I coughed. "Oh, easy there," said one of the firefighters. He held up an oxygen mask and said, "Here, put this on." I did, and after a few seconds, I was able to breathe a bit more normally again. I looked around the room. Everything, from the floor to the ceiling, was charred. By the door was a discarded fire extinguisher and a few areas covered with foam. I looked over to where Jenna was, and I almost wanted to vomit right there and then. She was burned almost beyond recognition, having just enough of her intact for me, though probably very few others, to even realize that was or had ever been her. The plugs were still hooked permanently into her carcass. The club owner's body was likewise scorched, only he had absolutely no flesh left uncooked. A few seconds later, 2 policemen entered the room and came over to me, asking me if I was okay. I was taken out of there in a stretcher and rushed to the burn ward at the hospital. From there, I was treated as best they could for me. I ended up having the leg amputated and fitted with a prosthetic. Fortunately, I happened to have the insurance and a good bit saved up to have afforded that. Of course, that meant I couldn't go to the club anymore. Not that that mattered anymore. Jenna wouldn't be there anymore. My Jenna. She's ours now. Those words have resonated with me ever since that moment. About a week ago now. The more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me. The being, the elder ones, claimed that my mind was too weak to
be used as a vessel like she and the club owner were. I was unsure of what they meant at first, but I thought back to that night at Jenna's, as well as the club before that. And that's when the dots started connecting, realizing that both Jenna, the club owner, and God knows how many others had all listened to Ghost Whispers I.O. before. None of them having suffered any sort of effects like me and the kid from the club that night had. I thought at first that it may have been something Rolf E. Cole had done in the event. Someone tried pirating the music like the club owner allegedly had. But then the thought came back to me that couldn't have been it, given that Jenna couldn't have paid the price he was asking for just to download the track that she played that night. Never mind the others she probably had. That led to the conclusion that only certain people could and couldn't be affected in any such ways by the music. The only thing I could think to do was to try actually reaching out to Rolf E. Cowell directly, see if he could explain any of it. But everything I've tried, emails, various phone numbers, social media outlets, have all resulted in nothing. I'm stuck on what to do now. I was finally released from the hospital to go back home 2 days ago. Didn't feel as relieving as it had the first time. My Jenna wasn't there with her snarky wit to greet me. No, it was just some random Uber guy who wouldn't shut the hell up. But it was what happened when I was leaving the hospital and on my way back to my apartment, though. Over the driver's radio, while it was on some comedic radio show, I heard the all too familiar droning noise in the background, but built in pitch to overtake the audio. It was followed by a deep, garbled voice bellowing, "Hominum flabit."
The Side Tunnel by Eric Doll. I hated that town. Sprawled across the rotting foothills of a dead mountain chain, the city was a mass of old South racism and corruption, filled with inhabitants too poor or too sentimental to leave for someplace better. The city sweltered in the midsummer heat, smog from traffic mixing with lethal amounts of pollen and dust to form a soup that killed asthmatics as effectively as a whiff of mustard gas. I had acquired a sum of money from a job a few months back, and my needs were modest, so I had nothing better to do than hang out at the fountain downtown, or at the coffee shop nearby. I met Charlie first, when I noticed some truly phenomenal photographs on his laptop. They were all of old, beautiful, decayed structures, some of which I'd seen around town. Charlie never made eye contact as he explained, in his mild, halting speech, that he didn't take the photos. Those were Jack's, but he handled setting up Jack's website. A few evenings later, I was sitting on the floor of Jack's tiny apartment, drinking beer and talking with a small group of kids that were mostly excited by abandoned and condemned buildings, fire hazards, and other signs of urban decay. They called themselves urbexes, or urban explorers. The leader of the group was Jack. He was passionate about his photography and was working his art into his college thesis. Jack was tall, with a surfer's build that could have landed him a contract to model for Abercrombie & Fitch, if it weren't for his shock of unruly blonde hair. Jack's girlfriend Annie at first seemed to perform no function aside from looking very good and hanging on to Jack. I asked Charlie about her once, and he said that Annie was a very good listener, which is what Jack seemed to want. Shane was huge. He topped 400 pounds, standing well over 6 feet tall, with thick slabs of muscle overlaid by thicker slabs of fat. He was from some no-name community in the forested hills of middle Alabama, and he dressed as if he was prepping for a deer hunt. For all of his size and massive presence, he was calm and very quiet, perhaps in response to Jack's constant diatribe about the architectural methodologies of whatever. The last member of the group was Petya. She was a transplant from some formerly Soviet bloc country, uprooted from all that she knew, and rudely shoved into the semi-rural Alabama soil, watered a bit and told to deal with it. Lucky for her, Petya was tough as a weed and thrived here. She was short and hard,
looking more like a 13-year-old boy than a 19-year-old woman. She'd discovered country music early after her move, and took to it with a passion that verged on neurotic, to a point that her speech was a heavy southern drawl punctuated with weird Slavic inflections. Jack's obsession with photography, specifically taking pictures of decaying urban structures, well, if given a chance, he'd talk at great and exhausting length about the moral imperative of photographing ruins, as we owed the original labourers and craftsmen some of our attention to the artisanship of their hard work. Jack had met Charlie in high school. Over the next few years, the pair developed their infiltration skills and expanded their group to encompass others with similar interests. Jack seemed to be the idea man, and had an uncanny talent for finding unexplored sites all over the area. Once Jack had located a site, Charlie would come up with a way to get in. Not only was Charlie an expert locksmith, he'd made friends with many of the librarians and city records keepers in the area. He was often able to provide historical maps and records for the sites. We bounced along a poorly maintained road in Shane's van, listening to Jack crow about our target for the night. Shane didn't appear to be a very smart person, given his size and usual closed-mouthedness. However, it was his idea to buy a white-panel van and affix official-looking State Department of Infrastructure decals to it. He'd mounted yellow bubble lights to the top, black and yellow caution tape around the bottom. When we stopped, he pulled a few orange traffic cones off of a metal mount on the front of the van and placed them in front and behind it. "Isn't that kind of conspicuous?" I asked. Shane smiled. "Yeah, ain't no damn hooligan kids want to be conspicuous, so the van must be here on official business." "Ah, here it is, man." Jack clapped me on the back. "Holy of holies, the waterworks tunnel. Half a mile straight through a mountain, and Charlie can get us in." I turned and looked at the small metal door set into the side of a hill. Doesn't look like much. I don't think it was that hard to get into. "It's not," Charlie said. "But we're going into the side tunnel." Charlie walked around to the rear of the van and pulled out a pickaxe. I wouldn't have been more shocked if he'd pulled out a severed head. As a rule, urbexes greatly disapprove of any actions that change a site. They don't litter, don't do graffiti. On some message boards, there are long-running arguments about even using chalk to mark for wayfinding. What's the side tunnel?" I asked. "You'll see soon enough," Petya said, handing me a head-mounted flashlight. I grabbed my backpack, which was heavy with gear, snacks, extra flashlights and water bottles. Jack grabbed a shovel from the back of the van, and Shane another pickaxe. Moments later, the van was closed and locked, orange cones glowing in the dim light. Charlie produced an actual key to the lock on the metal door and hauled it open. He caught my look and said, "Helps to have friends at City Hall." One by one, we walked single file through the door into the waterworks tunnel. Petya closed the metal door with a grunt, and the boom echoed through the darkness. The waterworks tunnel was much like every other tunnel, low, cramped and moist, with an unpleasant smell. Dirt caked the exposed brickwork, and in some places iron piping lay exposed. Like back 100 years ago when the Don brothers built this thing, there wasn't any good way to get water from the Cahaba River into town, Jack said. So they bored this tunnel right through the mountain, out the other side to where the river is. The side tunnel, though. Please, be quiet, Charlie said. I'm trying to count. We'd been steadily making our way down the tunnel. The darkness before and behind was absolute. I'd been in darker places, but the close confines were beginning to make me anxious. Jack moved away from Charlie, back to me. Anyway, like about halfway through the mountain, the Dunn brothers got to a spot they really couldn't get through. And they had to bring in heavier machinery, some kind of steam drill rig. You see how tight it is here, man? They dug a tunnel off to the side, then they expanded it. We were under a deadline, like about to lose their contract, so they made the miners work day and night. They actually set up a small camp in the side tunnel. There were sleeping areas with beds built right into the walls. Even had a small camp store. Eventually, the miners got through the tough spot. The Dunn brothers just walled up the side tunnel. Nobody's been in there since. Jack's words echoed sibilantly down the tunnel. Nobody until us. Shane laughed. It's bullshit, Petya said. There's no such thing as side tunnel. Is Jack being full of the shits again, like with that room under the fountain downtown? Hey, that was real, Annie said. You couldn't get the... Please be quiet, guys, Charlie said again, playing his flashlight around the floor and sides of the tunnel. Hey, help me look for an iron valve or gear or something. We all stopped talking then and began looking around the tunnel. I followed the large iron pipe for a few feet and then said, Hey, is this it? Charlie shone his light on the valve, then on a folded black photocopy of his map. Yeah, that's it. Now, Shane, try that wall right there. Right across from here. You see if it's brick behind that dirt. The pickaxe was incredibly loud in the tunnel. Good thing there's a mountain between us and anyone that might hear that, I said, holding my hands over my ears. Petya smirked and handed out ear covers from her backpack. Shane bashed the wall with a pickaxe a few times more, then scraped at it with the side of the axe. Yeah, there's concrete over brick right here, Shane said, pulling a crumbling red brick loose with his pick. Jack eagerly grabbed the sledgehammer. He and I took up positions on either side of Shane. We began to hammer away at small spots on the wall. Several minutes later, Jack's sledge punched through the wall a few feet farther down the tunnel. Hey, I'm through, Jack yelled. Come here, help me. Shane and I moved near him, breaking the 100-year-old brickwork. And he made a few feeble attempts at moving bricks out of the way until Petya shoved her aside. You might break a nail, Petya growled, and began stacking the rubble into two careful piles on either side of the widening hole in the wall. Charlie donned gloves and helped. Soon we stood before a small hole that appeared to open into a larger chamber. Charlie handed Jack the large spotlight. Yeah, after you, sir, Charlie said, bowing slightly and extending his arm towards the hole in the wall. Jack grinned and ducked into the hole, followed by Annie, Charlie, Shane, Petya, and finally me. From the other side, the bricked-over section was much larger than the small opening we'd made, nearly 6 yards across. There were a few wooden crates stacked on the sides of the tunnel, covered by dirt and dust-covered tarpaulins. The tunnel was narrow at first. It seemed to widen at some distance away. Its walls receded into the gloom, out of the reach of the small bright beam of light cast by Jack's spotlight. Jack moved the light around slowly, illuminating the side tunnel for the first time in over 100 years. How big was this tunnel supposed to be? I asked. According to the map, maybe 30 feet wide and 200 feet long, Charlie said. Well, it's a hell of a lot bigger than that, said Shane, staring off into the darkness. I think it gets a lot wider down there. Okay, guys, let's get what we came for, Jack said. Annie, hand me my camera back. We need to document this as we go through it, so we can have photos of the tunnel in its pristine state. As Jack set up his photography gear, we dispersed, each of us shining lights around the first part of the tunnel. I noted to myself that none of the group seemed particularly willing to go farther down the tunnel. Jack began snapping photos, the flash flaring like lightning. Hey, guys, look at this, Shane called from farther down the tunnel. The light from his flashlight made him seem small in the darkness, and his voice echoed strangely. Charlie, Petya, and I walked down the tunnel to where Shane stood. Hey, this isn't supposed to be here, Charlie whispered, I'd heard that line before. Hell, I've said it before. Suddenly I was gripped with a panicky certainty that I should leave. Drop my pack, ditch these fools, and run all the way to the doorway in the mountainside, open it, and keep running. Hey, maybe all the way to the ocean even. I shuddered once, swallowed, and pushed this thought down. I had a job to do. Shane was standing in front of the first building of what seemed to be an abandoned town. I counted over 8 buildings on either side of a smooth dirt street extending down the tunnel. The buildings were rudely finished, with unpainted grey boards cracked and warped with age, but mostly whole. The cavern in which they stood was quite large, but the roof was low enough to see by flashlight. "Jeez," Jack said, startling all of us. "Quit that, asshole," Petya growled, punching Jack in the arm. "You scared the shit out of me, standing in scary tunnel with Ghost down." She got closer to him, with a finger in his face. "You are full of shit again, Jack. You set this up to pull prank on this new guy, yes? You all knew this was down here." Jack backed up a step. "Hey man, back off. We had no idea this was down here. I mean, seriously? We had to break through a damn wall. How could we have known this place was even down here?" "The news articles I found did say they built a camp for the miners," Charlie said. "This whole area was sealed up till we knocked a hole in the wall. Seems pretty dry down here, so the buildings are basically mummified." Petya rolled her eyes. "It's exactly what we need, mummy buildings." She slugged Jack on the arm again, and then stomped off. "Yeah, camp, Charlie," Jane said. "This ain't a camp, this is a whole town. There's what, a dozen old buildings down here?" "I want to get out of here, Jack. Take me back to the van," Annie said, and then leaned on Jack in such a way as to press many exciting parts against him. Petya rolled her eyes. "We are not going back now, Annie. We just got here. If Jack is right, we are first. We are never first at anything." That seemed to steel Jack's resolve. "Yeah, she's right, Annie. This is the type of thing that lands me a National Geographic deal." Charlie then glanced back at Jack. "Us, Jack. All of us." "Yeah, of course, man. We'll all be famous. Now, let's get a shot at that building there," Jack said, with a distracted look that indicated he was no longer thinking about the current conversation. Annie and Shane cautiously investigated the shack on the opposite side of the tunnel. Petya and I walked down the tunnel, past the first few buildings, to a larger clearing. The center of the clearing had a large stack of ancient, mostly burned wood in a circular fire pit. A few rusted metal cans lay scattered around the pit. To the left and right of this pit, tunnels extended and disappeared into the darkness. I'd done my research for months, looking in the basements of dusty college libraries and used bookstores, scouring thrift stores, yard sales, and once I got to Birmingham, reading the papers, looking for reports of the missing. I had more doubts than clues, with only the scars upon my face as evidence that the thing that I sought was real, and not a paranoid fantasy of my own making. I knew I was in the right place when I saw what lay in front of her. Part 2. At the end of the side tunnel, carved into the raw rock wall like some hillbilly Petra, rose the face of a large building that could only be a church. The carvings had a crude look to them, columns and lintels hammered out of the stone with miners' chisels by men who might have seen a drawing of a Roman column in a newsprint. Crosses decorated the facing at various points, but my eyes were immediately drawn to the symbol above the only door. I recognized the symbol's loops and angles, but only in reverse, as I have only seen it on one other place, my own mirror. as a faint white tracery only visible now under the bright glare of the light reflecting off the scarred skin of my forehead. At that moment of recognition, as if in sympathy, my scars began to itch. Faintly, but the itch was there. A subtle warning. Get out. I knew I should listen, but it had taken so long to catch the faintest trace of this trail that... Hey, look, a cave. I wonder what's inside, Petya said with a knowing smirk. She shouldered her pack and walked into the doorway. I had no choice but to follow her. The doorway opened into a small, low tunnel carved out of solid rock. After a few feet, the tunnel turned sharply left, and turned again to the right, then opened into a larger room with a downward-sloping floor. The remnants of wooden pews sat rotting silently on either side of the narrow aisle leading down to the front of the room. At the front, a few large leather sacks leaned against a round structure that appeared to be an altar. As we moved closer, Petya let out a stifled squeak and stopped. She glanced at me, but I already knew. The leather sacks were in fact the desiccated remains of 3 people, hunched, headless, and kneeling at the altar. I stepped closer. What I'd originally thought of as an altar was in fact a pit or a deep well, its bottom hidden far below. Bodies, Petya said. A sidelong glance at her face showed me the shocked, bruised look about her eyes. She grimaced, then shouldered her pack. Jack will not be happy about this. Indeed, urbexes hate finding bodies. At the least, bodies are creepy and unpleasant, and at the worst, they can entangle a crew in months of police investigations, red tape, and possible trespassing charges. Yeah, let's try to steer Jack away from this for now, I said. In fact, let's head back. Petya nodded when we left the church, Petya glancing over her shoulder at that well. When we arrived back at the clearing, Jack was missing. Well, Annie was furious, eyes rubbed red and raw, berating Charlie and Shane. That's rule number 1, Shane. Stick with your buddy. You guys act like I'm just eye candy. Treat me like I'm Jack's Barbie doll who can't do anything. But I've been on more crawls than either of you 2 in the last year. Where were you, Shane? What were you doing? Shane stared at the ground, scuffing the dirt floor of the tunnel with his work boots. We're just... We were making out, Charlie said. It happened. Annie whirled on Charlie. Oh, for Christ's sake, Charlie. Couldn't you have kept your hands in your pants for an hour? Both have jobs to do. Well, same goes for you, Annie. Where were you and what were you doing? You've been stuck up Jack's ass all night, so we figured he'd be fine, Charlie said. In the glow of the flashlights, Charlie glanced at Petya and I and blushed. Look, this isn't helping. We need to find Jack. Couldn't have gotten far. Probably down the tunnel, taking pictures. Yeah, you know how he gets when he's found a good subject. We then spread out. Annie ran to the entrance, but saw no sign of Jack. I checked a few of the wooden structures, but found nothing. When we reached the end of the side tunnel, in front of the church, Charlie wanted to check inside. Boy, Petya and I just came from inside there, I said. I glanced over at Petya, who shook her head. She knew as well as I that the revelation of the 3 mummified corpses in the church would send the rest of the crew into a panic. If you want, I'll run in and check. You go and look in these other buildings. I'll be right back. Charlie rounded up the others and walked down the tunnel to the right, calling Jack's name as they went. I turned and walked back into the church. As I followed the tunnel's turns, I noticed lights shining from the well room. Dreading what I'd find, I walked into the small room and found it as Petya and I had left it. Empty, save for the 3 mummified bodies clustered around the well, and Jack's large spotlight positioned at the top of the well. "Well, shit," Jane said, in that peculiarly southern way that splits a single-syllable word into 7 or 8 more syllables. He peered into the well, but his flashlight was unable to pierce the gloom at the bottom. "Looks like Jack's exploring without us," I said. "We should probably go down after him." "Don't think that's a good idea, man," Charlie said. He was visibly shaken. Well, the whole group was. The 3 headless, mummified corpses squatting near the well did not help ease the tension in the room, and the group was decidedly angry at Petra and I for not mentioning them before. "You're going to go in there after him, Charlie," Annie said. "You owe it to him. If you're too pussy to go in, then I'll go." "We all go," Petya said. "I have seen the scary movies. We don't split up. Splitting up is when monsters get us." She shoved Shane out of the way, adjusted her headlamp, and began the descent. Annie followed, then Shane, and then Charlie. I climbed down the shaft after all the others, leaving that strange church in near darkness, illuminated only by the cold green glow of a few long-duration chem lights left at the top of the well. I've been lost in the dark before, and a little extra light can make all the difference. The tunnel at the bottom of the well smelled like blood. The others noticed it, and so Charlie began some tentative explanation about the amount of iron ore in the walls, then trailed off. They could sense the wrongness of this place. Under the pervasive smell of rust and blood, there was another, fouler stink. Not so much a scent, but the memory of a scent, a recollection of the odor of something horrible that once passed this way and might yet come again. When we reached the first intersection, Charlie asked us to stop. He fished around in his backpack and pulled out a can of highly reflective spray paint. "Charlie," Jane said, "urbexes don't leave traces. Worst case, they use chalk, because it washes away with water. They don't spray paint anything." "Fuck this place, man." Charlie popped the top, shook the can, sprayed a large arrow on the tunnel wall, pointing back to the well. "Yeah, fuck it in the rear." Petya startled us all with her cackled laughter. In ear, good one, Charlie." That set the rest of the group off, and for a time eased the growing sense of fear. We turned to the right and followed the new tunnel, periodically calling for Jack. The tunnel forked, split, then forked again. "There's miles of tunnels down here," Shane said. "How are we going to find Jack in all of this? He's not leaving any markers, and the floor's too hard to see his footprints." "We'll find him," Charlie said. "These tunnels have to go somewhere. What I'd like to know is why they're here. When at first I thought this was a coal mine. There's no bracing like I expected. So I thought maybe it was a saltpeter mine. That'd explain the lack of bracing and the crazy tunnels. But I haven't seen neither on these walls. None of this makes any sense." Annie, who'd been quiet for a while, stopped. "Guys, I saw someone up ahead. Jack!" she yelled and ran forward. We followed, running in a astute half-run so as not to hit our heads on the low tunnel ceilings. Annie called for Jack as she ran, gradually outdistancing us with her frantic pace. Up ahead in the gloom, we saw her pause, turn her head to the left, then lunge down a tunnel branch. "Hey, Annie, slow down," Shane yelled. Even though the air was cool in the tunnels, sweat beaded his face. We heard a thin shriek then, followed by sobs. "Annie!" Shane yelled again. We found Annie sitting on the floor of a room, the first of its size that we'd encountered. The floor was hard-packed earth, like the rest of the tunnels, there were a few old wooden boards scattered around. Her pack was open in front of her, and she was muttering a quiet stream of obscenities. She'd removed a boot and was wrapping her foot in gauze from her first aid kit. "Sorry, guys. Tripped over a damn board. Guess I was going too fast and wasn't watching where I was going." Shane and Charlie hurried over to her, clucking like upset hens. Charlie pronounced Annie's ankle to be sprained. "I guess we should take a rest break," Shane said. "What time is it?" "About 3 a.m, Charlie replied, looking at his watch. "Feels like we've been down here for hours." "We should go back," Petya said. But Annie shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not leaving without Jack." "Look, Annie, I know you thought you saw him," Shane said. "But we don't even know if he's down here," Charlie replied. Yeah, he is. We saw a spotlight at the top of the well," Annie said. "I know, but that's just it," pointed out Charlie, taking a bite of a protein bar. "Jack's a pro. He wouldn't come down here without us. I've been thinking, what if we have it all wrong? What if he left the spotlight behind while he went to fight us? We maybe somehow missed him." "Oh my God," said Annie. "I bet he's terrified. Well, someone needs to go back and leave a note or something." As she climbed to her feet, her ankle turned, and Shane and Charlie both caught her. "Oh, you're definitely done exploring," said Shane. "Okay, I'll take Annie back to the van. We'll leave notes for Jack along the way. And Charlie?" Shane looked down. "I think it's time to call the cops." Charlie blew out a compressed breath. "Jack is gonna be pissed." "Yeah, he will, but he shouldn't have run off like this. And his body's down here, and we have an injury. You want to keep going on these field trips, we better play by the rules." "Give us 3 more hours, Shane," I said. "If we can't find Jack by dawn, no problem. We'll pack up and head to the entrance, and we'll call the cops. But I think we'll find him before then." "And call Roberto," Charlie said. Shane tightened his jaw at this. Roberto was Shane's ex, and they'd had a bad breakup. But Roberto was a long-term detective on the city's police force and could smooth things over for the group. "I know you're still pissed at him, but we need his help." Shane helped Annie up, leaned on him as they staggered out of the room. I could tell from the set of Shane's jaw that he was pissed, but I knew Annie would make him call the cops. So, I had 3 hours, maybe less. I hoped it would be enough time. I knew I might be able to break back into the side tunnel in another month or so. But my guess was that the site was about to become very popular with a lot of different people. Oh, I clenched my fists. I was very close, closer than I'd ever really been. I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. I stood up, dusted off my jeans, and gathered the few items I'd pulled from my pack. Right, time to go find Jack. There's a lot of branching tunnels down here, so remember to mark them, Charlie. I think we missed a few when we were running after Annie. I turned to Petya. "You're the best mapper we have. Do you have any idea of where we are?" "Yep," Petya said. "We're about half a kilometer from the well. Pretty much straight line from there. Plenty of places for Jack to be. I say we do maze logic. Pick right-hand wall and follow it until it ends or loops back. We go for 90 minutes. If no Jack, we head back to well." "Surely we'll find him before then," Charlie said. "It's after 3 a.m. and he's got to be tired. Couldn't possibly be anything that interesting." Charlie stopped, turned his head. Then I heard the scream. Part 3. Mentally, I was prepared for this. I knew that I had made a conscious decision to lead these kids into a trap. and to use them as bait. I rationalized that by putting a few people at risk, I would ultimately be protecting many more. I knew that was just rationalization, though. In truth, I didn't feel guilty about putting my friends in danger. I felt guilty about not caring about them at all, when endangering them put me closer to my goal. "Annie," Charlie yelled. We ran out of the room and down a tunnel towards the sound of her voice. I saw her first, lurching against the tunnel wall, dragging her injured foot, eyes deep-socketed and huge in the bleached white mask of her face. Her shirt was splattered with a spray of blood. "Shane," he said. "You got Shane." "What got Shane?" Petya asked. "Don't know. Close to the well. Shane kept saying he heard something walking behind us. When we looked, there was nothing there, so we kept walking. And then there was something there, and it took him." Her face crumpled in grief. "Just pulled him right out of my hands. I don't know if he knew what happened. His face, he just looked so confused." Petya took Annie's hand, and Annie clung to her, sobbing. I knelt with my pack on the tunnel floor and rummaged through it. When Charlie saw the gun, he stepped back a pace. "Jeez, fuck, what the hell is that thing?" "The shotgun revolver, 6 chambers all loaded. You have to use it, be really careful. It's got no safety to speak of." The gun scared the shit out of me. It was huge, making Dirty Harry's Magnum look like a squirt gun. It was heavy and unwieldy, and hurt like a bastard to fire. But it was shorter than a shotgun and took shot shells, which was useful, as I'd hand-loaded every shell. I had no idea what might kill, or even hurt the thing that I hunted. But I had my hopes. Buckshot mixed with the rock salt, silver shot, gold shot, mercury, garlic, or, finally, communion wafers and holy water. Well, if that didn't work, I had some hollow point solid rounds that I could use on myself if it came to it. I pulled out 2 long hunting knives that I had hand-silvered. "Why would I have to use it?" Charlie asked, pushing his glasses up and blinking rapidly. "In case the thing down here, with us, gets me before it gets you." I handed the 2 knives to Charlie and Petya. "Be careful with those 2, they're sharp." I electroplated them myself. "Will they work?" Petya asked. "I have no idea," I replied. "I picked most of this stuff up by watching Supernatural reruns. I'm making the rest up as I go along." "We are so fucked," Petya said, and shook her head. "Look, I think they'll work. Worst case, it'll drive the thing off for long enough that we can get away." Annie, who'd been very quiet, looked up at me. "You knew." She lunged forward and punched me hard in the side of my face. I fell back and cracked my head on the tunnel wall. You knew something was down here, you bastard. You let us all down here." "Bait," Petya said, and sighed. She looked up from her near crouch and eyed me with contempt. I got up, rubbing my throbbing head. "Look, I've been hunting this thing for a long time. It's killed people and it's my fault. I let it out. So it's my responsibility to take it down." "You're the one with the gun," Charlie said. "Right. I'm the best chance any of you have of living through this. And I think that if there's anyone with a chance of hurting this thing, it's me." I stood up and put the gun into a holster, put 2 moon clips each into my jacket pockets. I shouldered my pack. "Let's go. Annie, take us back to where I got Shane. Everyone, stay behind me." Pulled out the gun again, we started walking back down the tunnel toward the well. The trek back was far worse. Charlie's markers glittered like cat's eyes in the distant gloom, and we all kept seeing shadows at the corners of our vision. Twice I nearly wasted ammo on a slight imperfection in the tunnel wall. The weight and bulk of the shotgun pistol made it extremely uncomfortable to carry for any length of time, so I eventually settled for keeping it in the holster, pulling it out any time I thought I saw something. We could see the handholds of the wall when we reached the area where Shane was taken. There was a great deal of blood splashed on the wall, and more trailed off down a tunnel that forked off from the main one. "There's the well," I said. "You three take the knives, climb up and get out of here. Call for help. I'm going after the thing that got Shane." "I'm not leaving without Jack," Petya said. She looked at Annie, and then looked away. Then I remembered the way Petya looked at Jack, when she thought nobody was looking at her. Fair enough. "I think we all know that Jack didn't make it," Charlie said, wiping his eyes. "But I'm not going without Shane, or at least finding out what happened to him." He turned away then, weeping silently. "We're coming with you," Annie said. "I'm not leaving without Jack either, or at least without knowing what happened to him. Like Petya said, we don't split up. You saw what happened to me and Shane when we went off on our own." I looked at all of the blood on the ground. "Nobody knows we're down here. They might find the van, but they won't find the entrance to the side tunnel. I've been in this type of situation before. Things change when the cops show up. There'll be a cave-in or a flood. All the cops will walk all the way down the length of the waterworks tunnel, and they simply won't see the hole we made. Because they can't. Or because they really don't want to. If you follow me, well, I'm probably not going to survive this. So you won't either." Annie took a step closer to me and shook a fist in my face. "You can't get off your white knight hero horse now, asshole." She grabbed my collar and began to punctuate her sentences by shaking my head. "Find my boyfriend now." I stepped back against the wall and pushed her away. "Okay, fine. So be it." We followed the spatters and smears of blood down a long tunnel that snaked and twisted and sloped downwards, gently at first, and then more steeply. My scars had been itching faintly since I climbed down the well, but the itching had increased to a shrill, insistent whine against the nerve endings of my skin. I could feel the looping scrawl of each scar, so faint as to be invisible in daylight, etched into my face as if held in place by a net of white-hot wires. The air in the tunnel began to thicken with moisture, the walls shining wetly in the reflected beams of our lights. I stopped, holding up a hand to warn the others. "I see light from up ahead," I whispered. Somewhere down the tunnel, a pale golden light flickered. I pulled the revolver from its holster, cursing its weight for the 100th time. We continued down the corridor, cautiously and slowly, partly due to fear and partly due to the floor, which was very steep and slick with moisture. The tunnel ended abruptly at a thin ledge that bordered a space, wide and open and chaotic with shape. First, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The lines and forms overlapping and merging, like looking skyward at the moon through an ancient tree. We all stood on that ledge for a moment, gasping, maybe making some small sounds, as our minds fought to process that view. Gradually, my eyes traced the subtle lines and edges of structures, clustered against the walls in claustrophobic clots and knots, like a type of architectural tumor. The walls of the cavern receded out and away, plunging down into mist-shrouded depths, fading from my view. The structures were lit from indeterminate light sources, lined in a dim gold light that did more to cast shadow than to reveal. As I stared, I began to notice the crumbled ledges, the blank and open entryways, the empty areas on distant walls where whole sections of the buildings had sloughed off and fallen into the pit far below. I I noticed the stillness, the silence of the place. "It's a city," Charlie said. "A dead city," I replied. "How can it be a city?" Annie asked. "There's no streets. Those doors open out onto thin air. That makes no sense." "Well, it makes perfect sense if you have wings," I said. I gestured at a brighter area down the ledge to our right. "That's where we're going." The ledge was smooth, its surface glassy but not slick. It seemed to emit a faint gold light that was only visible from the corner of my vision. We crept down the ledge for a few hundred yards, reaching a wide platform. Against one low wall was a large seat of sorts, and in front of that seat was a long, rounded metallic table. Shane's corpse glistened wetly on the table. Chest cracked open, ribs splayed wide like two open skeletal hands. The top of his skull had been removed, and a mass of black tubes snaked from the opening down to the table. "No!" Charlie wailed, and ran to the table. "Charlie, don't!" I yelled. Charlie reached the table and stopped. He reached out an arm and gently touched Shane's bloody face. Shane's eyes snapped open. I could see his lungs flutter in the raw cavity of his chest. His mouth worked silently, lips pulled back in a rictus grin, tongue thrusting against his teeth. His body began to twitch and spasm, and then the black tubes penetrating his skull writhed and pulled taut, and the spasm ceased. Shane's eyes rolled up in its sockets, and his eyelids closed, almost peacefully. Charlie whirled to face me, face contorted with rage and grief, silver hunting knife held in a murderous grip in his hand. What did this? What the fuck did this to him? Part 4. As if in answer to his question, the thing hit him so fast it was a blur. Charlie let out a brief scream as he was hooked high up into the air, then screamed again in rage. I saw Charlie plunge the knife deep into the thing's abdomen, pull it out, and plunge it in again. The thing let out an ear-splitting shriek and let Charlie go. Annie, Petya, and I watched as Charlie fell, tumbling over and over into the depths. The thing crashed to the floor and skidded to a stop against the cavern wall. "Shoot it!" Annie yelled. "Kill it now!" The creature stood as I raised the gun with two shaking hands. Oh, the thing was huge, standing over 12 feet high. I took a staggering step forward on curiously back-bent legs, and then another. I shuddered. I could see a milky, iridescent fluid seeping out of a wound in its belly. Its head snapped up and forward, and its eyes, oh, there were so many, were focused on me. I felt a disorienting tilt in my perspective, as if I was seeing myself and the room, and Petya and Annie, and the creature all at once. I felt a curiously mechanical ticking. I felt that the size of the thing was a mistake. It was much, much larger than it actually appeared. The creature spread its wings, 2 or 4 or 6, feathered and broad and black and leathery, tipped with hooks and talons, and flapped them all at once. Scent billowed over us all, the scent we'd smelled in the tunnels, acrid and dry like oranges rotting in the desert sun. It came closer to us, and I felt it outside my mind, a pressure that was immense and cold and horribly, inhumanly logical. I waited, even though I could still hear Annie and Petya screaming behind me, screaming for me to shoot this thing. My scars were now twisting and rippling on my skin, white-hot and reaching a point so far beyond pain I could not name it. I focused on that sensation and steadied my aim. The gunshot thundered deafeningly loud in the silence of this dead city. The shotgun revolver kicked viciously in my fist, and I nearly dropped it. The creature had closed nearly half the distance between us. It stopped, and some of its eyes seemed to blink. One of its wings seemed to droop. I saw that my first round of rock salt and buckshot had punctured a small, ragged hole through its leathery membrane. I braced myself and fired again. The creature recoiled with a scream as the silver shot ripped open a jagged swath across its chest. I fired once more and was rewarded with another scream. It was so close that its stink was suffocating now. I fired again and again, the thing reaching out for me with so many arms, its wings fluttering so fast they were a blur. And then it had me. Two of its arms clutched me around the waist and pulled me up close. Two more arms reached up with taloned hands, black and scaly, crusted with impossible jewelry, and clasped both sides of my face. Turned my head from side to side, almost gently, and then looked deeply into my eyes. Of the many things I saw in those huge golden orbs, with their rings within whirling and spinning rings, the worst was recognition. The pressure outside my mind intensified, and I felt a snap, like a green stick fracture from a short, sharp fall, and it came flooding through. It spoke to me then, not in words, but in a purer, an older form of communication. Thanked me for bringing it more meals, and thanked me even for bringing it information about the world from which it had been away for so very long. It promised that I was its favourite, and I'd be rewarded in some incomprehensible, impossible way. I felt a deep and loathsome love welling up in me for this thing, as a dog would unconditionally love its master. Then the creature screamed, shrieking in real pain, and it was gone from my mind. I felt it recede like a tide, and missed that presence, hating myself for feeling so. I fell to the ground in a heap as the creature stepped back, arms raised to its head. Petya had leaped upon the creature's back and was stabbing her long, silvered knife deep into the creature's eyes. The thing scrabbled its many taloned hands at her, leaving deep scratches on her arms, but she dodged and kept plunging the knife into the thing's eyes. Finally, with a deep guttural bellow, she slammed the knife with both fists deep into the center of the creature's skull. The wings stopped fluttering, and the thing toppled forward to the floor. Petya untangled herself from the thing's bulk and half stumbled to where I was sitting. Her face was ashen, and she held one arm with the other, blood oozing from long scratches on both. Annie shook herself and ran to Petya, dropped her backpack and pulled out the first aid kit. Neither of them looked at Shane. Once Annie had bound the worst of Petya's wounds, Petya stood up and walked over to the still form of the fallen creature. She kicked it, savagely, once in the head. She stooped to remove the knife. "Leave it," I said. She turned to look at me. "I think it's better off where it is." "It's dead. I killed it," she said. "Well, for now. But it might not be later. And that knife might postpone later for long enough. It's time to go." Annie gestured at Shane's body. "What about him? We can't leave him here." "I know we can't," he said. "But none of us have the strength to carry him out. And we don't know if that thing is going to wake back up, or if there's more of them." Well, that seemed to motivate Annie and Petya. Annie packed up her first aid kit, and we left the dead city by way of the tunnel from which we'd entered. I thought I saw the dim golden light growing fainter as we left, and that made me feel a slight bit of hope. The walk back to the well was long, far longer than I'd remembered. The lower tunnel floors were sloped upwards, and they were slick. Annie and I both fell at least twice, which did nothing to improve my headache or Annie's sprained ankle. Petya had lost a shoe in the fight, and had kicked off the other one before leaving the cavern. I thought about that shoe a lot while walking out of those tunnels. I wondered what some future explorer would think upon discovering that platform in a dead city of angels, and on that platform, the creature's corpse and a single shoe. When we reached the well, I realized something had changed. I could see light at the top, much brighter than the few chem lights I'd left behind. Annie saw the light and began to shout for help. A familiar voice sounded down from the top of the well, and a silhouette of a head blocked the light. "Annie, what are you doing down there?" Jack yelled. After much hugging and crying and kissing and a fair amount of punching, we got out of the well and back to the entrance of the side tunnel. Petcha was unable to climb due to her injured arm. Jack and I helped to get her out of the well using a Swiss seat that he'd fashioned out of grappling. Annie was able to climb out of the well on her own, putting minimal weight on her injured foot. According to Jack, he left his spotlight at the edge of the well as a light source for some incredibly amazing photographs. Midway through, the cheap Zeiss lens somehow fell off of his camera and shattered on the stone floor. In a panic, he ran to the tunnel entrance to find a replacement, only to realize he'd left his case of spares back at the van. Thinking it wouldn't be long, he ducked out into the waterworks tunnel and ran back to the van. "Yeah, man," Jack said. "It was totally stupid, guys. It was dark and I was in a hurry to get back. So I got my spare case and shut the back doors and locked the van. Then I ran around the side of the van. You know those big mirrors on that thing? Well, they stuck out 3 or 4 feet either side. Yeah, I clocked myself big time on one of those. I think it tore off the mount. Anyway, it knocked me completely unconscious. Woke up maybe a half hour ago with a killer headache. My body was all bloody. It was light outside. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I got my shit together and came back down here, but I couldn't find you guys. Jeez, it's spooky as shit down here when you're alone. I was about to freak out until I heard some noises coming from the well. Then I was really going to freak out." He paused to take a breath and a sip of water from a bottle. "Oh man, Shane's going to be pissed when he sees what I did to the van. Hey, where is Shane? Where's Charlie?" Jack wanted to go back immediately. Neither Annie nor Petcha would allow it. He swore he was going to get a group of people together to find Shane and Charlie, or at least their bodies. He said he'd call in every favor he was owed, do whatever it took. His first call would be to Shane's brothers, both of whom were even larger than Shane, and both of whom owned enough firepower to take over a small country. Well, I agreed and promised to help, but I was already planning to slip away as soon as I could. Jack's search party might find the side tunnel, but the entrance would be collapsed. Or the tunnel would be there, and even the building inside, but the well would be full of dirt, or simply missing. No amount of drilling, or explosives, or ground-penetrating radar would ever uncover that dead city. Annie and Petcha both hugged me, to my surprise, as we stood in the parking lot across from Jack's apartment. I shook Jack's hand and promised to call him after I got some rest. Put my gear into the trunk of my old, battered blue Toyota Corolla. As I was driving away, Annie embraced Jack again. His eyes caught mine over her shoulder. Then one lid drooped, and a slow, lurid wink. And in that moment, in the late morning lights, the other eye flashed gold, like gold rings spinning inside gold rings. And then it was gone. Well, it could have just been the trick of the light, I suppose. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.